Today, I have a special treat for you. I have AJW, known as Actual Justice Warrior, who has been a conservatarian law enforcement commentator for the better part of a decade, versus the only Stephen Bennell II, the king of liberal, blue-haired debate boards. It should be fun. It should be fun. Even though I've been told that this doesn't get as spicy as it normally does with Stephen, it's still going to be insightful. AJW is a decent debate opponent, and the topic is interesting. So without further ado, come on, YouTube. What's your problem?
The Democrats have to disavow violence every time it seems to come from their side. Republicans never own any of it.
Celebrities calling for bombing the White House. You have an assassination attempt on President Trump. You have all these instances of violence that's deflected, denied, and covered up.
Destiny, Sean, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me.
I think Brad is gay, but what a Chad, dude. What a Chad. Look at his hair. It's like perfectly coiffed. He's got an excellent jawline. His lighting is perfect. His lighting makes my lighting look like shit. I need to work on this. Anyways, but yeah, what a Chad. If I understand correctly, Brad is basically like a center-right conservatarian, but he's also gay. And so he tries to go along with the right wing, but then the right wing loses its mind. And so as a result, he hates that. That is a preliminary, very cursory look at his content. I could be totally wrong. Maybe he's like a raging lib. I have no idea. But anyways, we'll find out.
Yeah, of course. So it's good to talk to you guys, get two pretty different perspectives, but there's a lot going on right now. First off, I think everybody is pretty horrified by the Minnesota shootings over the weekend, and it's bringing up this recurring, unfortunately, topic of political violence in America today. I want to play a clip of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who was, of course, Kamala Harris's vice presidential nominee, speaking about political violence. I thought rather eloquently, and then discuss. Take a listen to this.
A moment in this country where we watch violence erupt. This cannot be the norm. It cannot be the way that we deal with our political differences. Now's the time for us to recommit to the core values of this country. And each and every one of us can do it. Talk to a neighbor rather than arguing. Debate an issue. Shake hands. Find common ground. It's not about hatred. It's not about mean tweets. It's not about demeaning someone. It's leading with grace and compassion and vision and compromise and decency. But we will need to do it in just more than actions in a memorial.
So
I'm sorry. We're going full screen for this one. Listen. Number one, all right, I'm going to get onto my soapbox, okay? That was Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate who backed Kamala Harris, okay? And I'm just going to say, on the outset, Kamala Harris had a shrill voice. She was a hypocrite. She was too progressive during the 2019 primaries, and she seemed to waffle on a lot of issues in order to appeal to moderates in the general election, which a lot of people saw as insincere. And they also tweeted about gun control, which was so cringe that I actually argued with people in not PV, but higher than PV. I was effectively trying to get messages to people higher than PV in order to say, you're hurting yourself. This is too close for you to be making these kind of unforced errors, right? And I actually passed that message along because I was so passionate about it. That them talking about gun control when we're on the verge of a fascist takeover was crazy pants. Now, with all of those criticisms being said, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris would not have done the tariff war that's been disastrous for the international economy, that erased $4 trillion worth of wealth, shut down thousands of small businesses. So that wouldn't have happened. They wouldn't have cut mosquito prevention aid in East Africa that's projected to kill a few 100,000 people over the next few years. They would not have cut the PEPFAR aid program, which cost $6.5 billion. We saved $18 per year per American. You can now buy a McDonald's meal that you previously could not afford because we are currently projected to have killed 60 to 75,000 people with like leaving their AIDS untreated. And if that goes for the next 4 or 5 years, there's going to be roughly 3 million people over the next decade who are going to die as a result of preventable disease, all to the tunes of saving the American taxpayer $18 a year. And I have not heard of a single foreign NGO or billionaire who has stepped into the gap to prevent this humanitarian disaster. So that's on Trump. Trump has killed, in my opinion, and based off of the news articles that I've read, at least a few 100K people. And if it goes unaddressed, by the time he leaves office, it could be a few million. That would not have happened under a Kamala Waltz administration. Trump has backed whatever Israel wants to do in Gaza, which frankly has been beat the shit out of Gazans every single day without any sign of rebuilding the actual infrastructure of Gaza and coming to some kind of like tentative peace. That hasn't happened. And then also he's talked about relocating 1 million Gazans to Libya in effectively assisting Israel with ethnic cleansing. His peace through strength rhetoric didn't somehow stop the Iranian-Israel conflict. And him waffling on it now, refusing to either do a preventative strike on Iran or say, Israel, you're on your own, is allowing the violence to escalate. So, in my opinion, Trump in his first 150 days has been an abject failure. Not only that, the cornerstone of his policy was mass deportation. And the second that he got a phone call from businesses who said, hey, you're screwing up my business, he said, oh, well, we'll stop targeting agriculture, construction, and service industry. Oh, not to mention, aren't they selling like 3 million acres at minimum? That's the small end. I've heard as much as 110 million acres of federal protected land. This is fucking devastating. This is like one of the I was alive during the Bush presidency where we invaded another country and killed incidentally a few 100,000 people, and I think Trump is worse. Do you know how hard it is to be worse than George W. Bush in a consequentialist analysis? It's amazing. So any Trump dick riders in my chat, I get that you probably didn't want to hear the past 5-minute rant, but truth hurts. Your guy sucks. Waltz would have been better. Pussy ass Waltz, who didn't know how to break down his shotgun, or did know how to break down his shotgun, but it didn't look good on video, was better than your guy. Sorry to say.
Sean, I'll come to you first. I really love what he had to say here, and I absolutely agree with it. It's the approach that I want to see everybody take in politics. But this is the same guy who called Republicans weird as kind of his campaign shtick. Just a couple of weeks ago said Democrats need to be meaner and bully Trump. I mean, I like what
Does bully mean murder? Come on, Brad.
he's saying, but I'm not sure that he's exactly lived it out.
Look, I don't want to be the guy to defend Tim Walz, but like you can categorize that stuff in terms of like campaign stuff. Like you're talking about bullying in a political context. If you think about it, a campaign is a warlike term. You have your ground game, your air game. So there's violence attached to normal, ordinary campaign rhetoric. But his point, what he said,
Thank you for steel manning at AJW. Thank you.
think I totally agree with. You don't want people killing each other and committing these acts of violence because you're angry about abortion or transgenderism or whatever the motivation was.
Yeah, no, I do completely agree with his actual point. But I wonder, Destiny, and I know we can talk about Republicans being bad too, but specifically on the Democrats, do Democrats like Tim Walz have to reckon with the fact that, I mean, a decent chunk of the Democratic base does support political violence, whether it's support for the assassination attempts against Trump, whether it's thirsting for alleged murderer Luigi Mangione. I mean, do you see some reckoning that has to happen here?
On the Democrat.
The reason why I'm laughing before I allow Steven to respond is because I just remembered, even though it's obviously on the tip of everyone's tongue, that Steven is the guy who was making fun of the firefighter who was the collateral damage for the attempted Trump assassination. So having this guy comment on political violence or how we react to political violence is actually That's a good choice for a debate opponent.
Democratic side, not as much. It's hard to talk about this without talking about the asymmetry, but focusing on the Democratic side, like, I mean, I will say that I agree with Sean that it is good to, well, when you're talking about campaigns and you're talking about campaigning, there's going to be terms that come up, and sometimes people will finger wave over these after a certain action happens. Like somebody will say like, oh, well, he said that we need to target this campaign, or, you know, they said that we need to fight in order to win this. And it's like, okay, well, come on, we're not going to strip all of this language from campaigning. And this language has existed in campaigning for, you know, for hundreds of years in the United States. So clearly that's not the problem. I feel like one of the big problems that Democrats, as far as I'm aware, when they came into the election season, after the BLM riots and everything, Democrats have had to disavow violence when it does happen on their side, if they want to win elections or if they want to be held accountable to some extent. It feels like there's a huge problem on the other side with them accepting kind of violence on their side sometimes and then disavowing that violence.
But we'll come and we'll specifically talk about Republicans and the things I think you're imagining. But just on the Democrats, I mean, I've been looking at polling lately. 28% of liberals say that they are openly supportive of the alleged murder of Brian Thompson by Luigi Mangione. Some polling found majority of left of center Americans from Rutgers University thought it was at least partially justified to murder Donald Trump. So I agree with you that Democratic elected officials pretty regularly come out and say, you know, we need no violence, just calm. But the actual base, I mean, seems a little bit bloodthirsty and unhinged to me these days when you're on TikTok and they're all talking about somebody do it, just take out Trump. Do you not get that sense about?
I do get this sense, Brad. I do get this sense. Okay. And I'm happy to be corrected by chat. You know, bear in mind, I probably can't keep up with you guys. Parasocial love to you and yours. Please like the stream, et cetera, et cetera. We're breaking 80 right now. Steven says violent language exists in campaigns, so that's not going anywhere. He says Democrats have to disavow violence if they want to win elections, but Republicans get to be more selective. Brad, interestingly enough, brings up 28% of people support Luigi Mangione, and I want to steelman this. And I'm actually curious because I don't find Brad to be a stupid guy on his Twitter. I actually think he's a pretty smart guy, at least as far as his Twitter goes. And he seems to be willing to call out bad actions of the right. And so I just want to understand if he understands this narrative. This is my understanding of the narrative, is that the United Health CEO created an AI-based auto denial program where effectively valid claims were being denied the first time they were applied for intentionally because he knew that they wouldn't come back. Like a healthy chunk of those people would not come back for reapplication. And so there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are clients of United Health who effectively got denied for justified treatment because of the system that this guy set up. And as a result of that, you can logically infer that some people didn't get care that they needed, and some people indeed may have died by the time that they were able to reapply for health care they were technically entitled to under the contract set up by the insurance company. And so the logic is, while Luigi Mangione, at least I think the sane logic, is that while Luigi Mangione committed a crime and should be punished, and murdering the United Health CEO did not really change anything, it was effectively vengeance, that ultimately, if this narrative is true, that the United Health CEO knowingly killed through negligence hundreds, maybe thousands of people, then in an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of morality, it makes a certain level of sense. That's the steelman of people supporting Luigi Mangione gunning down the United Health CEO. Then partially justified to kill Donald Trump. I just told you how the cuts, we're not even talking about the Medicaid cuts that are presumed through the big, beautiful bill. We're not even talking about well, actually, here we go right now. My newsfeed is filled with libertarians and conservatarians who are saying, if you sell off the land, we are going to resist you in an armed way. We're going to kill the agents of the Trump administration who are selling off our national heritage. Like literally, it's like the people who are selling off our heritage have names and addresses. I've seen that half a dozen to a dozen times. So this violence isn't uniquely left wing. If anything, Donald Trump is so successful at pissing off so many people all of the time. There are now members of his own base who agree with Democrats that he should be killed. So that's not even to mention like the hundreds of thousands of people overseas, like I mentioned, who are getting killed as a result of Donald Trump's actions. So I hope Brad understands that line of argumentation.
About the Democratic Party, Stephen?
I get that sense about politics in general. I think one thing we have to reckon with as Americans is we're far less principled than we either think we are or than we've fooled ourselves into actually thinking we are, or that we tell ourselves we are. Because when a lot of people say things like, I don't think that violence is the answer, I think what they actually mean is, I don't think violence is the answer to your problem, but it might be the answer to my problem. And
True.
And yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a lot of people who ordinarily, would say, well, violence isn't acceptable. But it's like, well, what about if we assassinate that guy or that guy? Or what if this guy goes? And it's like, well, that wouldn't even be violent because it would actually reduce the overall amount of violence. And this doesn't count as violence because it's actually self-defense. And you run into all of these weird mental gymnastics positions. I definitely agree this is an issue on the left, especially when it comes to murdering CEOs of companies and stuff, which is unhinged. But yeah, it's becoming more apparent, I think, in our entire political system in the US.
But Sean, I'll come to you in just a moment. But I just want to ask you directly, Destiny, do you regret at all the way you spoke after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, where an innocent man was killed and a father of two, and you made fun of him online? You talked about how you weren't really, I don't want to mischaracterize you, but you were pretty glib about the assassination attempt against Trump. Do you regret that at all? American politics is descending into chaos, and it's harder than ever to know what's really happening. The only way to figure out what's actually going on is with ground news. And a recent
fast forward the
in
commercial.
Los Angeles, speaking
Download
different
Ground News.
through my link. Exclusive discount is available now.
Ground.news/Brad.
So if you like for a full
Tributes to the atmosphere.
can't answer this question without bringing up the other side. So if you like for a full answer, I would say, and I'll maintain what I was saying earlier, is that the issue is that Democrats have to disavow violence every time it seems to come from their side. Republicans never own any of it. In a world, after all the J6ers got pardoned, do I regret? No, absolutely not. And I never would in front of a Republican ever. This would be a closed door conversation with a bunch of other Dems where we maybe would discuss strategy. But in front of Republicans, when Piers Morgan asked me the same question, and then I asked Dave Rubin, well, what did you think about, everything that happened at the Capitol? Like, well, that was driven by the media and that wasn't really us. And it's like, that world can't exist. The asymmetry between Republican and Democrat there can't continue to exist. It's untenable. The system.
But aren't you kind of just doing the same thing as Dave Rubin then? Saying that January 6th is bad, but I won't condemn it on my side. So what's the difference?
But guess what Phil KOE has told me on Twitter? Turnabout is fair play. So if Republicans won't disavow violence, why do Democrats have to? Now, for me, I would say it's because you're trying to be a good person and you're trying to be descriptively accurate about reality. But I understand that in the realm of politics, what Stephen is saying, which is effectively, if he's going to retract how glib and how cheerful he was that Donald Trump was almost killed and that a random conservative audience member was killed, then he expects Republicans in the same room to say, okay, yeah, January 6th was messed up. And if they're unwilling to do that, then he's unwilling to concede any kind of territory.
Difference between you and Dave Rubin?
The difference is that when one side has established a set of norms, and that's the set of norms that are the most effective at gaining political power, there is no virtue in not playing by that side. It would be like...
I think there is virtue in it, but it just might be ineffective.
Planning a UFC fight with somebody, and then you find out the other dude is going to show up with a machete, and then you're like, well, damn, I guess I have to go grab my machete. And someone's like, well, aren't you really doing the same thing as him? Well, I don't know if stepping into the ring and getting my head hacked off is virtuous. And I would say the same thing about the political environment in the US right now.
It's virtuous. You just might get your head hacked off.
Now, like my question to you or to Sean would be, have Republicans ever disavowed violence on their side, or do they just constantly?
They did for 1 month after January 6th. Checking in with chat real quick, though, because I seriously love you guys and I want you to be a part of the stream. C-Dub says, as the largest Batman fan for 2 decades, the new film with Pattinson is the only one that didn't bother me with how they portrayed Batman. That's interesting to me because I really felt like a lot of people thought that Christian Bale was the gold standard and that the Pattinson Batman was kind of like drawn out and dreary and overly long. But I've also heard that they kind of incorporated some detective elements for it. And that's actually what Batman used to be. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he was inspired by a character called the Shadow, who was a character who dual wielded 1911s in the 1920s. And he was like a vigilante who ran around at night taking out the scum. But there was also like a police detective element to it. And I think Batman was similarly inspired, especially the 1990s Batman cartoon. I remember detective work actually being a substantive part of the thread. Cricon says that was a hilarious scene, the straw polls for MIB going 80% for Connor like a month after Destiny was grilling his chat for that interpretation. Based. Then Gen X says, I didn't know Brad was actually gay until people started saying it after the stream. I mean, I thought he was gay for sure. Well, I don't even know if he's gay. For all I know, he could be like, no, I'm just a metrosexual. I just really like taking care of my skin. But I think I've seen other people say that he's gay. I have no idea. Eric Brandenburg says, Brad look like Robbie Rotten from Lazy Town. I don't know if that's good or bad. C-Dub says, Brad will just mew through the entire video. Brad is reminding all of us that we should mew, okay? And for those of you who don't know, you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and by doing that, it kind of forces your jaw forward and out. So oftentimes, like, because we hunch in our chairs and our necks are forward, like our jaw kind of goes backwards and goes up into our skull. And so it can make it look like you have a weaker chin than you actually do. And so if you're consciously, randomly, while you're relaxing throughout the day, there are people who swear that if you put your tongue at the top of your mouth, that like the roof of your mouth, then effectively it'll highlight your jaw more aggressively. Dude Man Sue says Chad Brad lighting versus Connor Virgin lighting. Yeah, we need to work on it. Yeah, we need to work on it. Destiny Old School says Destiny's intro was just wrong. Feel free to articulate how. Big in Gaming says, my bad, that vote in Iran was 99.3 perfect in favor with 2 million for and 1,300 against. Usually we would be sus of a vote like that in a democracy. Big in Gaming says, just pointing out that it isn't all black and white. Sure. Old School says Christian Blair's cons are held to accountable and have to answer for every act of violence, even if they're in no way responsible. See Gabby Gifford's shooting and the Aurora shooting. Okay, Old School, feel free to condemn January 6th, because what I hear as somebody who's anti-MAGA, as everybody else in this chat hears, is that January 6th was entrapment by the federal government. There were federal officers who were ginning up the crowd in order to go into the Capitol. It was actually Antifa instigators who broke into the Capitol first. The Capitol rioters didn't actually do anything that bad. It was effectively grandma and grandpa walking around on a guided tour of the Capitol. And I'm trying to think of what else, but there's like another dozen minimizations. Oh, the Capitol Police let the rioters in. That's another one that we hear. If you actually look at the footage, Ray Epps, the guy who everybody was like, oh, he was a plant. Ray Epps has done interviews since the riot, and he said that 2 days prior to the riot, he did want to go into the Capitol. He did see the election, or he did think the election was stolen. He did think that Trump needed the people in order to take the Capitol. But once he actually saw the violence between law enforcement and protesters, he decided that it was pretty fucked up and he didn't want to do it anymore. So there's actually footage of him walking back and forth in front of the Capitol, trying to calm down rioters and trying to keep the peace between law enforcement and rioters, which is why he didn't catch, I don't even know if he got a suspended sentence. I don't even know if he caught a sentence at all. So Ray Epps, and by the way, I've heard Ray Epps as recently as like 2 or 3 months ago. Why wasn't Ray Epps arrested? Because he was the one who was instigating people to go into the Capitol. Pretending that the right wing has just totally owned January 6th is total cope bullshit. So if you want to articulate in my chat how you accept the fact that January 6th was instigated by Trump's rhetoric, that he hasn't proven the electoral fraud, that he still references the electoral fraud, that Trump enablers still enable the electoral fraud despite never proving it in or out of court, how plenty of conservatives, including conservative alternative media pundits, still pretend that January 6th was not right-wing violence, then maybe I'll accept it, at least from you. But pretending that that line of rhetoric doesn't exist in public is absolute cope. C-O-P-E in capital letters. Whatever says, what a hypocrite. The Democrats are after stoking violence with alarmist cries. Alarmist cries, I already just told you how 300K people are probably dead and 3 million are going to die in 4 years. How is that alarmism if it's descriptively true? Sapien Green says, more than half the time, Kamala seemed like she had a hand up her butt, both in how stiff she seemed and how much of a politician she seemed to be. Agreed. She came off fake as hell. Whatever says Kamala wouldn't have closed the border either. Agreed. That's the one thing that Trump has done is he's scared so many Central and South American migrants shitless that they no longer come into our country. So if you don't like Hispanics, I guess you got that W. Bo Dickerson says, Connor, a true Republican trying to get Democrats elected. Well, maybe MAGA should stop sucking a barrel of dicks and I would start voting for Republicans again. Old School says, the congressional softball shooting where even Rep said Bernie and his followers were in no way responsible. Sure. Dude Man Sue says the millions of lives lost would track with the last presidency. What a goddamn shame. Yeah. Christian Blair says also mentioning shootings that happened 10 to 15 years ago. Okay. Mr. Hater says all of your orange man Brad prattle has nothing to do with Minnesota. Hey, Mr. Hater, you fucking arslur. No shit, it has nothing to do with Minnesota because Minnesota was a Republican shooting a Democrat. You dumbass. What are you talking about? Old School says out of 640 million acres of federally protected land, yeah, 110 million would be a lot. I've heard it's anywhere between 3 million and 110. Matter of fact, why don't we just go ahead and Google it? How much land is being sold by the Trump admin? As of June 20th, 2025, there's discussions, legislative proposals of the Trump admin for the sale of federal land. A bill under consideration in the Senate would make at least 250 million acres of public lands eligible for sale with a mandate to sell at least 2 million acres over the next 5 years. The bill directs the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, and U.S. Forest Service to identify and sell between 2 and 3 million acres of their holdings. A previous proposal to sell over 500,000 acres in Utah and Nevada was removed from a House budget bill. Yeah, so there in the Senate, there's a bill proposal for 250 million out of 640. So 640, let's go ahead and do the math here. I love how you guys act like it's not a big fucking deal. Of course it's a big deal. I fucking, dude, the amount of rage I have at people who are like, yeah, sell 40% of publicly owned land. Fuck you, is what I have to say in reference to that.
Only claim that
I'm not going to bother explaining it because seriously, like, I don't want to go back and forth on you. If you think selling 40% of publicly held land that has our wildlife on it, that has federal preserves on it, that has rare species on it, that is visitable by Americans in order to appreciate God and nature, and you just think that we should throw up a fucking Dollar General and a Chevron on 250 million additional acres inside the United States, when I can drive from Florida to Atlanta, in between between the Georgia border and Atlanta, there is so much rural and uncleared land that's obviously civilized and obviously already capable of being owned and obviously available for development that we need to sell federally protected lands out west. I'm not going to explain it further. Fuck you, you're wrong.
that it's not actually them. We just saw the shooter in Minnesota. They're desperately clinging onto this idea because he was appointed to some private council with, 100 other people 10 years ago. There's actually a secret Democrat. We saw the pardoning of all the J6ers. At what point do Republicans ever disavow violence on their side? There's no virtue to be gained.
Well, I mean,
constantly begging for forgiveness from them. So no, I don't think it's the same thing. I'm totally willing to do.
At the end of the day, you're paid to attack Trump, even though I know you say we'll do it for free. Whatever. Please refute anything that I've said. Go ahead. Please go ahead and find me articles saying that the mosquito... I can do this all fucking day. I could do this all goddamn day. I'm going to tell you again, because you're saying you're getting paid to attack Trump, even though you said you would do it for free. Number one, Tucker Carlson gets paid. Candace Owens gets paid. Ben Shapiro gets paid. So all your favorite conservative pundits are getting paid, by the way. AdSense, super chats, revenue. So you can say they're free agents, but they're fucking not. Because what do they do at the end of the day? They simp for corporations and they simp for international organizations. So don't tell me your favorite, just because I'm small time and your favorite guy is big time, you have a way to criticize me with the way that I make my fucking money. But I guarantee you I can't find a single fucking tweet or comment about Ben Shapiro of, oh, didn't you create a media company and you take a salary from Daily Wire? So of course you're going to simp for Trump? Never in a million fucking years would you have the balls to say that. But let's go ahead and see if you can refute a single thing that I've just said, okay? Trump has slashed, through USAID and PEPFAR, has slashed the funding for mosquito prevention in East Africa, which is going to kill a few 100,000 people. Go ahead and debunk that. Trump has cut PEPFAR, which is a $6.5 billion program projected to have saved over 25 million people over the past 30 years. He's saving you, the American citizen, $18, which is the equivalent of a fast food meal per year. And as a result, it's projected that already 75,000 people have died. And over the course of the next 5 years, 3 million people will die. Go ahead and debunk that claim while we're at it, because we're not talking about random abstract numbers. We're talking about human beings. Okay, so there's 3 million people that you can go ahead and debunk were killed. I already know Trump has stopped sharing intel and has stopped giving aids packages to Ukraine. And as a result, Russia has been able to missile strike and do drone strikes into Ukraine and kill hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians. So go ahead and debunk that talking point. I already know that he's wiped out $4 trillion off of the international economy. So go ahead and debunk that point. I already know that he's, what else has he done? I already know that he did mass deportations for innocent people and sent them to a fucking Central American prison without due process. I already know that he had to backtrack on that and bring the guy back. I already know that, what else? He's just going after random Hispanic normies. I already know all of this. So debunk any of it. You're saying that I'm motivated against Trump. Do you know what you haven't said? You haven't said that I'm wrong. You're saying I'm biased. You haven't said I'm wrong. So this comment, whatever, I know you're a part of my chat and I appreciate you coming in here and saying conservative shit every now and then. You can take this comment and you can stick it right up your ass. Okay? Turn it into a little ball, crumple it up like a piece of paper, put it on your butthole, and then jam as hard as you can. That's what you can do for me, bud. Back to the content.
Disavow all political violence, but conservatives aren't.
Well, so Sean, I'll bring you in here, but I'll say I criticize the misinformation about the Minnesota shooting. I've criticized pardoning violent January 6th protesters. I think a lot of Republicans have, of course, condemned the violence in Minnesota. Obviously, some have spread misinformation, the Mike Lees of the world, and I think it's really shameful. But Sean, your response to the argument that...
Yeah, I mean, like, it's weird to talk about asymmetry when you have assassination attempts on Brett Kavanaugh, you have celebrities calling for bombing the White House, you have an assassination attempt on President Trump, you have all these instances of violence that's deflected, denied, and covered up by the left-wing media. I mean, even in the same time period as January 6th, you had the most destructive riots in American history. And what do we see?
This is an okay point that BLM was cheered on by the left and it was fucked up.
Magazine, I believe, publishes an article about how it's mostly peaceful because what we did was expand the denominator and the stats by including Facebook meetups that had 6 or more people in our stat group in order to deflect away from the most violent riots in history. That same article highlighted that there was nearly 600 violent riots post George Floyd.
Sorry, what's that?
In just the first 90 days after that. So that wasn't even the totality, but we still hear about January 6th. It's a constant thing that is displayed in the media. Trump gets called out for it. And by the way, deservedly so for pardoning violent people. But the idea that it's like a clean disavowal on the left is absurd. Like one of the major talking points about the recent LA riots was that, the riots aren't that big of a deal because they're not literally rioting everywhere across Los Angeles. The riots are only happening in certain areas. And it's like, oh, wow.
Like, neighborhood.
Yeah, like, Hurricane Katrina only hit New Orleans. The rest of the country didn't even rain. So I don't know why we talked about Hurricane Katrina when it hit New Orleans. It doesn't
Based and true.
make any sense. So like this is a constant thing. And yes, there's hypocrisy on both sides. And there's also conspiracy theorism that's probably worse on the Republican side. I mean, you have the Minnesota guy and then you have like the Nancy Pelosi guy that Steven mentioned. So there is problems for sure. But the idea that the left clean disavows violence is absurd.
I'm okay with that. I think you remember during the 2020s that there was plenty of people who were like, yeah, like the BLM riots are bad, but aren't they justified at the end of the day? And it's like, nah, burning down your own communities doesn't fix anything. So sorry, The rioting is not justified. We can understand it descriptively, similar to Luigi Mangione. We can understand it descriptively while still thinking that the people who do it should be punished and incarcerated. Dank Brandon says, yeah, but that is after we had Don Jr. posting the Paul Pelosi lover Halloween costume meme. Yeah, Paul Pelosi. I hate the Pelosi's, by the way. So I'm not saying this because like I'm a big fan of the Pelosi's. I hate the Pelosi's. I think they're grifting, lying, insider trading maniacs who effectively are everything wrong with Congress descriptively. But there was a schizophrenic who went to the Pelosi's home in his whitey tighties, showed up and bashed Mr. Pelosi's head in with a hammer, right? And conservatives were making fun of that. I don't even want to call those people conservatives. I want to say MAGA. MAGA was making fun of it. Old School says, Waltz was making jokes about enjoying Tesla failing at business while Tesla dealerships were being firebombed and shot up. Fuck Waltz, he's an un-American piece of shit. Old School, I'm going to say fuck you too. Reason why is because Waltz saying, oh, your Tesla shit is taking a reputational hit. You still, I'll check the chat. Don't worry. I'll still scroll through the chat. Do you know why I dislike Elon Musk? Because even though Starship is an impressive achievement, even though Tesla vehicles are an impressive achievement, that doesn't change the fact that he came up with $150 billion worth of cuts. He originally said he was going to target 1 trillion or 2 trillion. That went down to 150 billion. Then after it went down to 150 billion, the things that they did cut were things that were within the purview of the executive, namely USAID and PEPFAR. So they saved almost nothing. They saved $9 billion a year, and exclusively they killed people who had AIDS or people who were going to get AIDS or people who have AIDS. And they've killed people who they can't prevent mosquito prevention for. So they've evaporated our soft power and they killed hundreds of thousands of people through incompetence. And I don't see you batting a fucking eye. I've said, this isn't the first time I've said this. I've said this probably a dozen times. And you know what I hear from conservatives consistently, which I expect to read later on in my chat and get triggered by? I expect to hear, not our problem, fuck them. That's honestly what I expect you to type in my chat is, I don't give, like, you don't give a fuck about Africans with AIDS. You don't give a fuck about people dying from dengue fever and malaria in Africa. You don't give a fuck about Ukrainians getting bombed by Russians because we're no longer supporting them because it costs you too much money. And realistically, the savings back to you, which you're not going to deal with, is what I said, is Donald Trump and Elon Musk, through cutting $9 billion worth of the federal budget, they saved you $20. So for a fast food meal, you're letting hundreds of thousands, millions of people die. So you're saying, fuck Democrats, fuck Destiny, fuck all these people. And you know what I'm saying is fuck you. Fuck you right back. That's what I have to say. Dude Mansu says, Connor, same with the mentally ill veteran who set himself on fire for Palestine. The left just loves optical L's. Killing some CEO did nothing but stroke their ego. Yeah, it's obviously cringe. Obviously, supporting murder and suicide is cringe. C-Dub says, I'm pro-Luigi, but I'm not left-leaning. That's a Counterpoints chatter if I've ever seen one. Wowman542 says, Trump solves the political divide in America by making everybody hate him at the same time. Gigabrain. Yeah, that's the 5D chess, is making even conservatives and libertarians fucking hate his guts. C-Dub says, reminder that the whole reason Destiny wasn't capitulating to Rubin was because Dave was just earlier joking hammer time over the one politician's husband getting whacked. Yup. Which is fine. Just don't pearl clutch. Don't pearl clutch at me. If you're laughing at people getting their heads bashed in with hammers, if you're laughing at, I'm trying to think of another thing, but basically January 6th, if you're laughing at, what's another right-wing violent thing? So this is where descriptively, I'll concede to the right wing. They are quote unquote less violent in the ways that they don't do violence as often as left wingers. But when right wingers do violence, it's fucking crazy. It's like a mass shooting or a fucking terrorist attack or bashing some dudes in with a fucking hammer. You know what I'm saying? Like it's when right wingers do violence, they do it right. You know what I'm saying? Kingslayer says that is the same reason behind pro-Palestinian people refusing to condemn Hamas. Yeah, fucking insane. Not only is it bad optics, it's just morally reprehensible. Bud123 says, no, Brad is gay. Okay, cool. Wowman542 says, correct. For decades before the 2000s, the subtitle for Batman's reputation among villains and hence was the world's greatest detective. Based. Base. Dude Man Sue says Batman the Animated Series was the best Batman. Rip Kevin Conroy. True. Hedonic Treadmill says Brad is a pretty cool guy, but he do be mewing hardcore. Well, good for him, man. His jaw's looking good. Starhawks for $2. Thank you for the super chat, King. Completely unrelated. Do you follow any sports? Nope. I don't play sports ball. Don't give a shit about sports ball. Sorry to disappoint. All right. Anyways, clicking on this, I'm gonna get back into the content. I am gonna mute myself because my wife did bring me a delicious breakfast. I'll still be interrupting. Don't worry. I'm sure they'll say something to piss me off in the next 5 minutes.
I mean,
Like
we
they
want
often
to
hear it.
Oh, just as a quick, this will always happen, and there's nothing I can do to counter this because it's just always spread out. Every time I talk about MAGA or the Republicans or the right, I will talk about, you brought up earlier, Mike Lee, the sitting U.S. senator, or you'll bring up like President Donald Trump will say these particular things. And then the counter's like, well, what about what was on Twitter? What about what Time published? These are not the political lawmakers. These are not the elected people in Congress.
Maxine Waters.
When the BLM riots happened, Biden had to disavow the violence when he was running for office. He had to have a clean disavowal saying violence wouldn't be accepted. We bring up the LA riots now. Gavin Newsom, in no unclear terms, said, if you are committing violent acts, you will be arrested. He didn't say these are secret MAGA operatives, which is what Trump would say. Why does January 6th get brought up over and over again? Because Trump still contends that the election was stolen from him in 2020, right? And these are from the president or from political leaders, not published in Time or in the New York Times or in the Washington Post or on Twitter.
John,
the asymmetry there is insane.
I think that's a legitimate point. About
Karen Bass, Maxine Waters, representative in Congress, saying that there was no violence that she saw. Like, we hear this constantly, that there was nothing breaking out, even from Gavin Newsom, who did like just say that you would be arrested, or Karen Bass. They were saying that there was no violence until after the National Guard was deployed. That's just not true. And blaming the National Guard being deployed in response to rioting for the rioting is absurd. And again, it's all about shifting it to the other side.
No, he said that there was no purpose for deploying the National Guard because they had it under control.
They were
he didn't
saying
say that there was no violence. He said that it was ridiculous for Trump to claim the violence had been cleared up when the National Guard had been deployed, because the National Guard hadn't even been deployed when the violence had been cleared up. So the whole point was that Trump illegally mobilized the National Guard. He federalized California National Guard, which was illegal. If you read the underlying statute that he cites as EO, he didn't have the authority to do that without the cooperation of the governor. And that was the whole purpose. Again, Newsom, in no unclear terms, condemned the violence, said you'll be arrested for it, and they've acted as such. He never agreed with or supported any of it. And yeah, there's no equivocation there.
Yeah, there is no equivocation there, because these politicians were downplaying this. They were saying it was just in a little area, and they were blaming the post-deployment of the National Guard as the thing that caused the violence, even though that was the response.
Yeah,
well, the deployment of the National Guard was to ratchet up the violence. That was the goal.
To protect federal buildings.
No,
that were being targeted.
LAPD is the third largest policing force in the United States. So they did not need the National Guard to go and defend.
Pretty sure they were the second.
No, I think New York Police Department, I think Chicago are larger. But the idea that the National Guard needed to be federalized on day two and brought out was ridiculous.
Well, I guess, Destiny, the way.
Yeah, and that's where, for me, I'm probably in between these two people. I think that Democrats will oftentimes sweep for rioting because rioting is the language of the unheard. I think they're overly sympathetic to, violence, and then they'll even talk about, like, well, is vandalism really even violence? Is burning cars and interrupting highways even violence? That they'll always try to, like, intellectualize it. And so I think Democrats do have a problem with that. And what I want you to take away as fellow grill hottists is that everyone's bad. I know that Stephen is a Democratic operative. He is somebody who is going to prefer the Democrats 9-1 over Republicans on almost every issue. And that's fine. And if you're a Democratic person, good for you, whatever. But I do want you to understand that people who are not partisan, people who are not tribally aligned, like I'm tribally aligned center-right. However, MAGA has totally lost me with all of the crazy shit that I've said twice in the stream already. So as a result, I have to make alliances with people that I don't agree with. And so Stephen's sweeping for the left doing bad shit. I'm not going to be just like Stephen and say, oh yeah, like the Democrats are actually amazing and they never do anything bad. And I know that's not fully what he's saying, but let's face it, he's rhetorically sweeping for it. So don't expect that from me is my main takeaway. Eric Dom says, you are exactly right. Batman's thing is not having superpowers, but basically being the smartest and most well-prepared person in the room. And he used to show it by solving cases based. Eric Dom says Batman even used to shoot people in the first comics, although I kind of think they changed it to struggling for the non-fatality later. Based. Christian Blair says, regarding the congressional shooting, Bernie apologized, but giving Dems or at least progressives argued against stochastic terrorism, he should take blame for saying Republicans' healthcare bill. And then it cuts off. Anyways, Rob, RAWB, says, not to mention eliminating so much of the national park system, which is supposed to save us money, but it earned vastly more than it cost. It's nakedly stupid and robbing the American people. Agreed. And by the way, right-wingers can cope and seethe and say, well, we should develop this land anyways. I'm telling you, there's a libertarian undercurrent on social media that are effectively all the guerrilla fighters who are ready to fight federal war. A lot of them are in the rural areas like Shadow 2 Bravo. And listen, man, if BLM shows up and starts turning everything into Dollar Generals and shopping malls, there's probably going to be there's at minimum going to be vandalism, and at maximum, there's going to be some killings. Fashion 40 says, people don't realize how nature is needed and is a character of this country. We're one of the few countries in the world with such a vast biome. Agreed. Bo Dickerson says, the federal government should not own 85% of Nevada. I'm not going to explain it. Fuck you. Well, fuck you too. So there we go. We know where each other stand. You want to set, and by the way, Arizona, I kind of don't give a shit about, because let's face it, it's a vast fucking desert. You want to sell off Arizona, go the fuck ahead. But when we're talking about Idaho, when we're talking about Montana, when we're talking about the grasslands, when we're talking about the mountainscapes, nah, fuck you right back. If you want to sell some shitty desert, go ahead. But I'm not selling, I'm not interested in selling the grasslands and the mountains and all that bullshit. Dude Man Sue says, hell yeah, I'll pay you to shit talk Trump, Connor. Godspeed and amen. Thank you kindly for the dono. Phantom says his counter argument was, but the Dems would have done worse. Okay. He is just British Connor. I don't know, but okay. Back to the content, lol. Yep. Razzle Smasher says, Connor raging at MAGA is exactly the kind of content I come here for. Well, good. Starhawk says, full screen Connor versus Nebraska Steve. Who wins? Probably Nebraska Steve, but that's only because he's carrying like a rusty knife that he's going to stab you in the kidney with. Christian Blair says, I will give AJW credit for stating that right-wingers are more conspiracy-based. Fashion 40 says, smokes blunt with glee seeing Trump tards get bodied by counterpoints. Well, don't get too comfortable. Whatever says, I can't really argue seriously in small chats. You need to bring on conservatives to do that. Okay. Whatever. I accept that line of argumentation that if you start posting counter arguments in chat, you're going to get dogpiled. I accept that. If you're still here and if I didn't totally piss you off and you left. However, what I'm saying is, even if you took one of those talking points, right? Even if you took one of those talking points, let's say that you took on malaria and dengue. I can steelman the opposition, which is it's not America's problem. Africa should take it on. And if Africa's not going to take it on, the EU should take it on. They're closer. That's the steelman of the position. But my counter to that steelman is effectively saying, okay, that's fine. Off-ramp the program. Give a loan to the African country. Subsidize temporarily the European support for the program. Transition it over to them and then get it off of our books. But cutting it off is killing people. C-Dub says BLM was one of the most financial costly due to insurance claims, but that's even with other considerations. I'm not sure what that's in reference to, but okay. Christian Blair says Connor's the most consistent streamer that responds to chat. True. Dude Man Sue says Brett Kavanaugh. They protested at his house. God, I know you were on good terms with AJW, but I loathe this clown. But I know burning bridges and whatnot. No, it's okay. Like AJW, I think, and I are going to have a contentious relationship no matter what. Anyways, back to my breakfast.
The reason I'll challenge you on that is I think in this case, maybe these riots wouldn't have gotten out of control, but we did watch, and I know I'm not trying to do the bringing up BLM riots again. We watched dozens of people were killed in these riots, mostly in blue states, and the local leaders, whether it's state or local officials, did not adequately control and use local law enforcement. So even if you think it's wrong to send in the National Guard, this idea that, well, we should have just let Gavin Newsom handle it. They could totally be trusted to shut down rioting. I mean, we seem to have some pretty recent history contradicting the reliability of that notion, Destiny.
So, okay, as a conservative.
This is true, but I'm interested to hear Destiny's counterpoint.
It's incredibly strange for me to hear you say we don't trust the states to handle anything. We need the federal government to come in and bring the National Guard in or the Marines to do policing.
We don't trust Democratic governors.
Work. That is an astounding claim that you could perpetually generate energy with rolling federal founding fathers in their graves with these types of claims, because the whole point of our system to break up police and to break up other things between states' powers of the federal government is kind of a bedrock principle of our country.
True.
Firstly. Secondly, Donald Trump himself was complaining that, you know what, you can't send in the National Guard without them asking for it. So, you know, what can I do? That was a complaint that he had. So why is he doing it now, you know, on his own impetus? I do agree that there were a lot of problems related to the BLM riots, for sure. I think every liberal has had.
What I love about Stephen, in reference to the BLM riots, is he has this trump card where everybody can be like, Democrats didn't condemn, Democrats didn't condemn, Democrats were too chill, Democrats were too chill. And yet Stephen has that perfect quote where it's like, the riots need to fucking stop. They needed to stop months ago. I don't give a shit if white dipshit militias start mowing down protesters who are burning down buildings at 10 p.m. at night. And so while Democrats, liberals, progressives, leftists can 100% be accused of being too sympathetic to rioters, I think that Stephen specifically cannot.
I do a million times, despite the fact that conservatives will never acknowledge violence on their side. But to pretend that that's going to play out every single time now, it's like the LAPD was deployed. The LAPD was, you know, having things under control. To pretend that now we have to send in the National Guard every single time there's a riot in every single city and state, is that the new rule? Like, that's insane.
This is like the paradox right here, is like, if you deploy law enforcement and they prevent a riot, then people will say that the force used is disproportionate to the situation. However, if law enforcement pulls back because it's a protest and we don't expect it to be a riot, when the riot breaks out, people end up blaming law enforcement for not having a strong enough response. So you're kind of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because we don't know what the alternative is.
But Stephen's point is that you follow the Republican norms that we've established in our country. And I don't mean Republican Party. I mean, we are in a republic. We are in a place that is allegedly ruled by the rule of law and representative democracy and due process and legislation. So if you're following it, Trump realistically had two options. He can federalize the National Guard via the Insurrection Act, which he didn't do, or he can let the states handle it, which he didn't do. So him mobilizing the National Guard under the federal shit is effectively, without declaring an insurrection, is effectively him trying to have his cake and eat it too, where he doesn't have the bad optics of declaring an insurrection, but he simultaneously gets to be heavy-handed. So no, I'm with Stephen on this, where if we have laws that are established within our republic that separate law enforcement from the military, and we have clear chains of command based off the situation, you follow the chains of command and the rules of law written down. You don't just get to make this shit up halfway. And the only reason why we're tolerating it right now is because it's Trump. And we're just waiting for him to get the fuck out of office or die of a heart attack.
We can guess, like, if these protests got as big as the Black Lives Matter riots, then the danger could have gotten to that level as well. But we won't know, because there was a strong enforcement from the LAPD followed up by the National Guard,
which should have been done through the correct legal channels
almost immediately after this stuff broke out. So it's like, you know, this becomes a purposely like pointless argument, because you don't know what the alternative was. Like, we
just
have
to be clear,
based on history.
I just want to hear this said in plain English. You believe the National Guard should be deployed at every single riot?
I didn't say every single riot, but if you
so what you just said, that if a riot is stopped by police beforehand, then we won't know if it was an over response or not. So what is
I said, if you
yeah, what's the barometer with which you're going to use to judge in order to deploy federalized National Guard? That's what Stephen's asking, and I think it's a good question.
Use force and that deters the rioting, then people will say that the police are too heavy-handed and all of this was totally unnecessary. But
and by the way, as a former law enforcement officer, I understand exactly AJW's point, but I'm just saying, why are we not following the processes that we already have established?
Don't use enough force,
then you pay electoral
then
consequences.
people will say that the police didn't act in time. So you have to basically guess.
Or instead of guessing, what if we said that the governors of the states, the people who are close to the issue, they have the right exclusively to ask the president to federalize the National Guard and bring them in? Maybe we should just like go with the laws as written. Wouldn't that make sense?
I mean, they do have the right to deploy the Guard, but what do you do when you have a governor that's derelict in your duty to deploy the National Guard?
then the governor would get impeached or voted out of office.
I get your point. They'd face the
Recall,
political
but
consequences.
yeah, there's a process in place for that. It can't be, it cannot be that the small government Republicans are all of a sudden okay with a federal police force. The same people who aren't even okay with a federal ID now want the federal police force to do riot control all over the country. That's just not. We can't live in that world. Not in the United States, at least. Not without significantly changing the way we view policing in our system.
Destiny, but is there any limit to, like, because you're essentially saying that, for example, in 2020, should they have sent in the National Guard? No, let the cities burn, let dozens of people be killed, and then the local political consequences can affect the governors who refused the National Guard or who didn't exert law enforcement hard enough. But should a president really be expected to wait and watch massive suffering unfold and to just say, well,
Yeah, in a representative democracy, absolutely. This is why we say elections have consequences. Freedom has a cost. One of our founding fathers has this famous quote that Republicans used to quote all the time, which is like, those who would trade temporary security for essential liberty deserve neither and will receive neither, from Benjamin Franklin. This used to be a principle underlying conservatives, and yet I see people wholesale abandoning it because they're scared. No. I trust Benjamin Franklin more than I trust Donald Trump. Sorry. All right, back to chat because I love you. Dude Man Sue says, Brett Kavanaugh, they protested at his house. God, I know you're on good terms with AJW, but I loathe this clown. I know that burning bridges and whatnot. It's okay. We can have spicy debates in the future. Fashion 40 says, honestly, though, anybody who can stand for January 6th is a traitor to the Constitution and are un-American. Well, unfortunately, they are shitloads of Americans, so we are kind of fucked. Christian Valera says, the worst regarding the BLM riots was the media, not Dem politicians. Sure. Well, QC John says, is that true that the 97% peaceful number included Facebook groups? No idea, but there was somebody who went and actually checked that study because that was said on Twitch and YouTube Politics over and over and over again. And somebody on a panel that I was a part of said, have you ever read the methodology? The methodology sucks ass. Nobody had read the methodology and nobody was able to refute his claim that the methodology sucked ass. Kingslayer Damocles says, Antifa threw Molotov cocktails at the White House, forcing their way past the front gate. Left called Trump a bunker bitch and positively joked about that before the Pelosi incident. Yeah, the lesson that you should take away. I understand that I had a very feverishly rage-filled rant against Donald Trump. I understand that I had that, so all the libs are probably soy clapping back at home. But you need to understand that my perspective is the fact that both parties suck. You just have to choose the lesser of two evils as maximally as possible. Bo Dickerson says PEPFAR wasn't reauthorized, but was funded by the continuing resolution in March of 2025 at the same level as 2024. Keep lying, though. Bo Dickerson, I'm going to say, fuck you again, because you don't know what you're talking about. When Trump assumed office in February of 2020, he put a 90-day pause on the outgoing of funding, and then it expired in 2025, and Congress has done nothing about it. So no, don't accuse me of lying, Bo Dickerson. Matter of fact, this is your final warning. If I am one thing and one thing only, okay, well, actually, I'm a lot of things, but I'll tell you about one thing. I'm telling you exactly what I think. So if I am incorrect about something, I am happy to be corrected, okay? If there is something that I state that is factually incorrect, I am happy to review documentation that shows that I am wrong, and I am happy to amend my perspective. But there are not things in this world that I know to be untrue and then I utter to you. There are enough lying, grifting sacks of shit out there that no matter how it affects my career, I am not interested in lying to you. So this is the last time that you get to call me a liar in my own chat. If you want to criticize what I've said, or if you want to say I'm wrong, go ahead. If you accuse me of lying, I'm kicking you the fuck out. And you can go listen to one of those other grifting fucking dickheads that's out there, and you can suffer in your own little fucking self-made hell because you won't listen to what's going on in the world. So I'm going to assert this to you, assuming that you're actually going to go double check what the fuck you just said. PEPFAR was reauthorized through March of 2025. Donald Trump took office January 20th of 2025. In January, February, somewhere in there, he announced that there was a 90-day suspension of outgoing aid, as his right as the chief executive of the federal budget. So that cut off the money that was going out for PEPFAR. Since it expired in March of 2025, PEPFAR has not been reauthorized. And if anything, it's part of the rescission package that was sent back to Congress via Doge. So if you want to correct any of those facts or details, be my fucking guest. But number one, don't accuse me of being a liar. Fuck you for that. Number two, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. Dick. Big in Gaming says, there was a man caught outside of the house of Kavanaugh with a gun. He turned himself in because he thought he was going to attack Kavanaugh. Okay. Possum Nation says, there is problems. The most basic grammar is no longer being taught in schools. Well, sometimes it's funny to have bad grammar. Big in Gaming says, New York Times did a story about Kenosha post-riots and nothing had been rebuilt. Based. Rob says, honestly, Elon can eat shit for the salute and Twitter revamp. Yeah, that's like the least of his crimes. C-Dub says, Pelosi. Yeah, that was the Dave Rubin was memeing about the Destiny punching back about needing to capitulate to bullying goons. 100%. We're at like 100, so chat's popping off a little bit. So I'm going to read Valor Media Networks and Connor's and Counterpoints chats. Cise Puede says, right-winger violence you didn't mention is the shooting here in Minnesota. I mean, the entire conversation is about the shooting in Minnesota. I think it's presumed. Effectively, what is it? Some Republican dickhead who all the people on Twitter claimed was a Democrat shot and killed 3 people, I think. And one of them was a couple who were like a state Democratic representative. And the other one was, I think, another either Democratic representative or a family member. And they had like a hit list and it was all Democrats. But the Republicans were just pretending that it was a Democrat who was killing Democrats. So Christian Blair says, right-wing political violence goes back decades, and so does mainstream justifications downplaying that violence. Yeah, but so do like race riots, which you could say come from the left. So, yeah. N Sorts is breakfast. It's noon. Well, I only have caffeine in the morning. And I am tired of seeing tears for gang members. Okay. Let's go ahead and see if you're tired of these tears. I don't give a shit. I'm a Marine, dude. I'm a fucking sociopath. I can fucking watch all sorts of fucked up shit and not have any emotion. Let's go ahead and pull up Mis Hijos Deportation. So you're saying that you're tired of fucking watching gang members or whatever. Where's the gal in the elementary school parking lot? I've seen it like a dozen times. Search elementary school deportation. You can go ahead and tell me that this person's a gang member and that you want to see them deported. If somebody wants to link it to me in chat, there's on Twitter, I've seen it multiple times. Mom deported. There's one specifically where there's a mom in an elementary school parking lot and she's screaming, my kids, my kids, my kids, because she's there to pick up her kids and they're deporting her and making no attempts to get the kids. So por favor, please, my kids. So yeah, let's go ahead and watch this, whatever. You can say that tired for gang members. Okay, so let's just watch like a normie Mexican. Let's see if this gets you.
Oh my God.
Oh, cool. So, you know, is she a gang member, an Argentinian migrant who probably has some kind of pending case, but you know what? They're going to go ahead and deny her anyways. And her kids are in the school. They're not making any plans for the kids. They've already had plenty of kids who were basically looking for their parents to pick them up, but their parents didn't pick them up because they were citizens and the kids weren't. So they end up in the foster care system. Okay. You don't see me crying. I'm not crying. I think it's fucked up, but I'm not crying. So you can just stare at that. Anyways, you're frustrating.
They'll hold Gavin Newsom accountable for it. Also, presidents get blamed, and I think rightly and wrongly, for basically everything that happens in the country under their watch. So I think Trump would also have gotten blamed if a dozen people had been killed in LA and he had just sat on his hands, and Gavin Newsom said no to the National Guard. So he said, okay, we won't send him in. And maybe that would have been the correct thing to do in some ways. But is he really just supposed to let people?
Trump won the national. Okay, Bo Dickerson, we'll take a look at it. We'll slow down stream just for you. Trump won National Guard case. Sounds like bullshit to me, but that's okay. We'll do it. Trump won National Guard case. Trump lawyers cite War of 1812 against Newsom's LA National Guard case. This was 1 day ago. And then Trump allowed to keep control of the National Guard. That's not what we're arguing. We're not arguing whether or not he has the authority to authorize the National Guard. The question is whether or not he actually did the things that you needed to do in order to authorize them. Well, let's go ahead and read this. President Donald Trump's reference to the War of 1812 in legal documents related to California Gavin Newsom's National Guard case. Writing in response to a U.S. District Court case regarding Trump's deployment of troops to California, Trump's lawyers argued that Trump had the authority to do so based on previous cases and laws that were used in the war fought between the United States and Great Britain between 1812 and 1815. Why it matters. Last week, a U.S. District Court ordered Trump to return control of National Guard to Newsom amid ongoing protests against the Democrat. So are you lying, Bo Dickerson? Did you lie? Last week, a U.S. District Court ordered Trump to return control of the National Guard case. Were you lying? Newsom had opposed the deployment of some 4,000 troops to the area, which meant Trump had to federalize the States Guard for the first time in more than 50 years and asked the judge to stop them. But hours after the ruling, the Ninth U.S. Circuit of Appeals blocked the order. Okay. What to know? In a document, Trump's lawyers argued the courts had already granted the president the power to deploy troops based on his exclusive discretion, citing an instance in which President James Madison activated New York troops to serve in the War of 1812. They argued that this stemmed from a 1795 law regarding the use of troops in the event of imminent danger of invasion. Are we in imminent danger of invasion, Bo Dickerson? The lawyers wrote that when the decision was challenged by a member of the New York militia, it was concluded that the president had the sole authority to decide when troops were needed in this context. Okay, are we in imminent danger of invasion, Bo Dickerson? You want to answer that question for me real quick, since that's what they're citing in their ongoing legal dispute? Gavin Newsom's legal win over Trump lasts only hours. Let's read this. The Ninth U.S. Circuit of Appeals on Thursday temporarily blocked a federal judge's order that directed President Donald Trump to return control of National Guard troops to California after he deployed them in response to the riots. Earlier on Thursday, U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer had ruled the National Guard deployment was illegal and both violated the 10th Amendment and exceeded Trump's statutory authority. So it seems like he lost the lower level case. Let's see the rationale for the higher level case. When asked for comment, the White House pointed Newsweek to Trump's post on Truth Social on Friday, thanking the appeal court for the decision. If I didn't send the military into L.A., that city would be burning to the ground right now. We saved L.A. Oh, cool. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for Newsom directed Newsweek to his remarks to Thursday. I'm confident in the rule of law. I'm confident in the Constitution of the United States, Newsom said. I'm confident in the wisdom and judgment of a very well-respected federal judge, and I'm confident on the basis of the review of the 36 pages, absolutely it will not stand. So it's pending. Okay. Hold on. Let's read this one. The appeals court ruling came just hours after the Breyer's order, which was set to take effect on noon on Friday. His order applies only to the National Guard troops. Breyer said he would not rule on the Marines since they were not on the streets yet. The authority to call up the National Guard typically lies with governors, but there are some circumstances under which the president can deploy the troops. Trump federalized the California National Guard under an authority known as Title 10, which allows the president to call the National Guard into federal service under certain limited circumstances, such as when the country is invaded, there's a rebellion or danger of rebellion against the authority of the government. In his ruling, Breyer said the protests in LA fall far short of a rebellion. Okay, so what you're saying, Bo Dickerson, you accuse me of lying. I'm going to accuse you of lying. So what you said is that he won his case. He didn't win his case. He lost at a lower level. An appeals court stayed the order, and the court is still under review about whether or not he has the authority to do so. And in the submissions to the court that's currently reviewing it, because this was posted 1 day ago, he's saying Trump has the authority to do it for imminent invasion. In your 130 IQ fucking giga-brained analysis, do you think that a few dozen rioters burning 3 cars is an imminent invasion of the United States of America? If you answer yes, then again, take your opinion, turn it up into a little ball, stick it up your anus, and shove it. Thank you for your time and attention.
Will die and then trust the electoral process to hold people accountable for it, Stephen?
Yeah. Yes. I'm.
Okay.
I don't know what else to say. I mean.
Yes, that's rule of law.
And I'm glad I read, I guess, my Federalist Papers. Yes, these would be the arguments that, yes, you allow the process to play itself out. We have 50 different states. We didn't win the Federalist Papers being read, but we have 50 different states now where people can try their own experiments. They can vote for who they want when it comes to governor, when it comes to mayor. And if they don't like the way that the process is playing out, then they have the right to either recall vote or vote in new people next time. But
there's the Discord if you want it.
The idea that the federal government ought to be the one to come in and take care of local policing is not okay. And the president doesn't just have to sit by. I know that Trump has somehow brainwashed every American into believing the president can either be the most heavy-handed person in the world or completely derelict in duty. Not to say that you two are necessarily saying that, but there's a ton of middle ground that the president can have too. The president can get on his, bully pulpit and he can tell people, I have things that I can make available to you. I can help you with this, or look at what this state is doing and how they've effectively managed things, right? I think Abbott, didn't he federalize his, or didn't he already deploy his National Guard in Texas ahead of expected protests for the No King's Day? Now, whether you think that's right or wrong, in Texas, they have the right to do that. And he did do that. I didn't hear about any huge protests or problems in Texas, so maybe it worked for them. So you have the right to vote for that. I wouldn't want a president to come in and supersede my governor or local official when it comes to local policing stuff any more than a conservative would or should.
I mean, Democratic governments have done a whole lot of that, superseding state level policy decisions, though, no?
Give me one example.
Well, you think of like healthcare policies, federal government trying to tell them how you attach to federal funds. You have to have this expansion of Obamacare comes with all these strings attached. You have to have these different things. You think of like
which you can opt in and out of, by the way.
Sure, but I think this is fundamentally different because these are actions that are passed by the Congress, right? Which is designed to be an arduous and painful process. So if it's passed by Congress and then it's done from there, I think that would be significantly different. We wouldn't be having this conversation if Congress had passed an amendment to, I forget which U.S. code it is that allows the president to unilaterally dispatch the National Guard. Then we wouldn't be having the same conversation. I would say I disagree with Trump doing it, but
the Insurrection Act.
At least it's not illegal, I guess.
Sean,
but,
do you have thoughts on the legality of it?
It still has to be adjudicated. I mean, I believe they were citing some provision of law that allows them to do it in order to enforce federal law. And there is precedent of sending in the National Guard over the state's objection. It comes from the Eisenhower administration, where he used the National Guard in order to forcibly integrate schools because your local politicians were against racial integration. So there is precedent that backs this. There is a law. There's an argument. Obviously, that's why they're adjudicating in the courts. Eventually, the courts will make their ruling on this particular case. But the idea that it has,
you know what, Bo Dickerson, I'll do you one better. Okay, I'll go ahead and Google what authority did Eisenhower use in order to integrate schools. What law did Eisenhower use to integrate schools with National Guard? President Eisenhower used Executive Order 10730 to federalize the Arkansas National Guard and send in federal troops to enforce the desegregation of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. This action was taken in response to Governor Orville Faubus's decision to use the National Guard to prevent black students from entering the school. Weird. In 1957, 9 African-American students known as the Little Rock Nine attempted to attend Central High School, which had been ordered to desegregate. That's interesting. The reason why it's interesting to me is because I don't know how an executive order would be sufficient in order to federalize the National Guard. However, I do think it's weird that you effectively, after the Supremacy Clause, you have a governor violating the civil rights of Black Americans using the National Guard. So I don't think I'm going to be able to figure that out on stream. That seems a little bit too complicated of a web for me to disentangle, but there's something you could Google. Eric Dom says, I think Dems have a similar problem as Trump had when asked to condemn the Proud Boys of condemning the extremes. Agreed. General So says, you should do viewer call-ins. We're thinking about doing like a community day on Saturday. I'm really busy, so it's going to be hard for me to actually finally commit to it. So just bear in mind, it could still be weeks, maybe even like a month or two before we get there. But as soon as I know that I'm financially secure, which, by the way, we should chill in a moment. But by the time that I know that I'm financially secure, where we're making enough revenue from pre-recorded content and we're making enough money from like super chats and stuff that we're self-sustaining. Once I know we're self-sustaining without Grassroots Hegemon being like our big oiler, then I'll be more open to spending even more time with the chat because let's face it, it is my job but I have to be focused on things that I know give me an ROI. Whereas if I'm spending time on things that I don't have an ROI on, return on investment, and then I'm like missing things or things are falling through the cracks because I'm too busy thinking that this is going to last forever, then we could miss the opportunity to actually make it last forever. Creekon says, ooh, Discord Collins would be awesome. True. Dr. Zaya says, I was happy to see AJW and Destiny reunited peacefully. True. God Explorer says it's not true. Which one? Valor says, what you eating? Eggs on toast. It was very good. Possum Nation says, I think you and Richard Hanania would have a great combo. He has great insights and he has a good amount of material that was used in Project 2025, but he also thinks MAGA is insane. Based. Christian Blair says the murders that resulted from BLM riots were not politically motivated. They were the result of robbery, opportunity, and interpersonal crimes. Sure. But at the same time, you can still say it's political because the political opportunism was able to capitalize, or excuse me, the criminal opportunism was able to capitalize on the political movements. God Explorer says, I want to know how many people died in all this rioting. Well, the most recent one, 0. But in BLM, I think it was a few dozen. So anyways. N-Sword says, and hey, wait a minute. That's what Trump did with FEMA in his last term. Interesting. Christian Blair says, if you're going to pick a womanizer, pick Ben, not Trump. Okay. Whatever 4690 says, Dem politicians went to bat for BLM rioters and got them soft sentences. I agree. That was cringe and lame, and they shouldn't have done that. Val says, a buddy of mine was a Capitol police officer during January 6th. He tells a very different story than Fox does. I believe it. N-Sort says he had to be talked into sending help after weeks. True. C-Dub says, you're so right. Conservatives who forego liberty for safety deserve neither. Thank you. Christian Blair says, who is the left? Celebrities and Dem citizens, politicians like AOC and Nancy condemned Trump for rhetoric regarding protesters. They never mocked him for being placed in the bunker. Yeah, if you want to get specific with it. But if you want to pretend that the Democrats have no problems with violence, I think you're coping. Hedonic Treadmill says, I've been going with don't shit my pants and tell me I'm incontinent. For don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. That's funny. Whatever says, if Kamala had won, free speech would have been curbed. The border chaos would still be around. Woke degeneracy would be the norm again. Okay, well, I mean, what's that against a few million people's lives? You know, a few million people dead, but at least we don't have, let's say this, at least we don't have Hispanics coming to our country. At least we don't have like progressives being annoying on social media and also reading books to kids, like the gays and the transes. And at least you can say the N-word on Twitter. You're right. Although even if Trump lost, even if Trump lost, you would still be able to say the N-word on Twitter because Elon would still be in charge. Connor's cherry picking? How? Tell me how. I value the rule of law over what Trump has done with mass immigration. And I also think it's funny that he flip-flopped on mass immigration. I prefer freedom over woke bullshit, and I think we could have won the culture war without Trump. Then in reference to free speech, again, I cite to you, Elon had already bought Twitter, so if you wanted to say the N-word on Twitter, you still could. And I see dead babies from Gaza constantly, and who is supporting Kamala would support Israel, but she wouldn't support ethnically cleansing Gaza. Trump is currently supporting ethnic cleansing in Gaza. I think you have like a problem tracking arguments in your mind because that is not a refutation of anything, whatever. Starhawk says society collectively lost its mind during the summer of 2020. We had communist anarchists literally taking over multiple square blocks of an American city run by gun-toting thugs. It was barely covered. I mean, I heard a lot about it, but I watch a lot of YouTube. Anyways, back to it.
Absolutely no justification or no precedent in history is just not true. And again, specifically, they were being...
Sorry. Shill. Like the stream if you haven't liked it. It's free. We're live Monday through Friday, 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. because I do see a bunch of extra people in here right now. That's all free. Watch the VODs on the Counterpoints channel. Super chats if you got them. Never required. Always appreciated.
Used in large part to protect the federal building. So like for the purposes of upholding federal law, like it seems to align. But again, it's going to be adjudicated. I forget what the court case is right now.
I don't want to get too bogged down in the National Guard stuff, but I get what both of you are saying. I want to talk about another form.
Well, just to be clear, the National Guard stuff is very important because it was a huge overreach in federal power. And again, this idea that it'll be adjudicated, Trump has said that over and over and over again. They don't even try to remain within the bounds of the law. They break the law over and over again, saying, well, the courts will figure it out, or they'll say they'll ignore the courts. And now that they've been getting slapped down by the courts over and over and over again, they're trying to make arguments like injunctions should be impossible, or we don't actually think.
Problem with federal injunctions that even many Democrats, the Chuck Schumers of the world, acknowledge. Now, the answer is not to defy them or ignore them, but I think the system, it's too easy to just find one judge somewhere in the country and get a policy block nationwide. And there's forum shopping and all sorts of issues with that. So I'm not sure all their grievances there are illegitimate, but I want to move on to the topic. Sorry.
Okay, sure. Just to be clear, getting rid of the concept of injunction is an outrageous idea and completely defangs the government. I'm not saying get rid
of the concept of an injunction. I'm saying
that's what the government was arguing. The Solicitor General was arguing in front of the Supreme Court. That
I'm not signing on to that, but there's been legislation proposed in Congress, bipartisan legislation, to narrow the scope and the ease with which you can forum shop to get national injunctions. Now, our next topic I want to talk about is this new thing among Democrats.
That sucks, man. Brad actually seems like he's pursuing nuance, and so as a result, I think he's going to suffer similarly to me.
And your mileage may vary on this. Some of them are.
And just to explain what he was saying in case you weren't paying attention, Brad was saying that there is bipartisan legislation in order to limit the scope for which you can forum shop. And what he's saying is, so right now, judges have the capacity to give a ruling on a case, and then that applies nationwide. And so what happens, or at least what conservatives are accusing progressives and Democrats of doing right now, is they just go from district to district to district to district, applying for cases so they can apply a national, like a nationwide injunction with a sympathetic judge. And so what Brad and the bipartisan legislation is arguing for is that injunctions should be localized. So as far as I know, federal districts operate, they have like a certain territory that they're responsible for. And so if I understand the legislation correctly, bear in mind, I haven't actually read it, I'm just inferring based off the conversations, then once a federal injunction is put into force, it would be in force at the level of its authority. So the federal injunction would apply to all actions at that district. And if they wanted to apply it to nationwide, then they would need to appeal it to a court that had nationwide jurisdiction, like the Supreme Court of the United States. It would slow things down, but it would slow things down as far as getting an injunction to bar bad behavior, but it would also make sure that ultimately a correct judgment was applied nationwide instead of having regional courts effectively have authority over the entire country.
Different situations, but whether it's Alex Padilla kind of approaching the stage and interrupting Kristi Noem's press conference, that one I think is a lot murkier, but we just had this incident with the New York City comptroller and mayoral candidate Brad Lander basically attempting to physically link arms with and refuse to let go an illegal immigrant who was being arrested by ICE. He was then arrested and charged with, or not charged actually, but he was arrested on suspicion of obstructing justice. And then he was then released without charges. I'm actually going to insert the full video of what happened here because I think it's highly telling, so people can watch for themselves.
Wait.
Guys, back up, guys, back up. I understand you're pregnant, but you need to get back up. If you're interfering with this arrest, we're going to be back up, guys. Back up, guys.
This is not legal to take someone without a judicial warrant.
Please don't put him in the elevator and then claim you have the warrant.
We don't have a warrant for him.
I will let go when you show me the judicial warrant. Where is it? Where is the warrant?
Look at my hand here.
So show it. Let us see it. So let us see it. We want to take us the warrant. We want to
Please stay back, stay back. No! Take it back. Take it back. Step back. Please, step back. Step back, guys. Step back. Step back.
U.S. citizens. Step back. You don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens. Please stay back.
Step back, guys.
You don't have, I'm not obstructing, I'm standing right here in the hallway. I have to see the judicial warrant.
You're arresting them.
Please step back.
Are you trying to help here? It's ridiculous.
Step back, guys. You can
You
take
don't
pictures,
have
but
the
please stay back.
authority to arrest U.S. citizens asking for a judicial warrant.
Stay back, please. Stay back, please. Stay
Press,
back.
we go too. Sorry. No way. I'm safe. Where are
This is resisting without violence, at least at the state level. There's actually a cop saying for it, which is when in doubt, resisting without, because effectively it's something that you can charge. You can definitely give somebody a ride to court. Whether or not it stands up after court is different. But effectively, by there's probably like some kind of obstruction charge where he's obstructing like the lawful carrying out of duties. And ICE, while they don't have probably legal authority to arrest random citizens for immigration crimes, I guarantee you they have the authority to arrest citizens who are interfering in an ICE operation. So this guy presuming that he could intervene in like what is presumably a lawful arrest and not face any kind of like legal or physical consequence is just inaccurate. I am curious to see what they're going to say about it, but I'm going to go ahead and check in chat because, again, Parasocially love you guys. Like the stream, super chats if you got them, join the Discord, etc., etc. Sacred Snow says, what gang members in particular were you thinking about? He was thinking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That's who he was thinking about. Kingslayer says, it's effed up what that mom put her kids through, what ICE put the kids through. Okay. Let's just say that Kingslayer and we don't agree. Dominic Galletta says, or the translator who aided U.S. troops in Afghanistan getting put in cuffs and deported. Yeah, I think that's pretty fucked up. Now, obviously, I want to know why, because if it turns out that he's a pedophile, then I'd be like, okay, yeah, you can deport that guy. But if he's like if he doesn't have a criminal record, if he's working within the United States, if he has a pending asylum claim, if he worked with the United States Armed Forces being a translator, then yeah, I think that's, it's fucked up. It's beyond fucked up. John says she's totally a gang member. Effing MAGA makes me angry more than crying. Yep. So I'm not crying. Okay, I'm wrong. No gang members were deported. Whatever, 4690. That's not what anybody said. No, like 95% of Democrats or liberals, they don't give two shits if you arrest or incarcerate criminals or arrest, incarcerate, and deport criminals. Nobody gives two shits about that. What they give a shit about is the fact that there's a bunch of normie Mexicans who work in our institutions, who subsidize our national labor, and you're running around the country, arresting them and deporting them. And by the way, in a 4-year term, you're going to get, what is it? It's like 2,000 per day. I think the height is like 2,200. That's like the maximum amount of deportations that you guys have achieved so far. 2,200 times 365 times 4. You're going to get maximally, you're going to get 3 million. That's if everything goes to plan. 2,200 times 365 times 4. You'll get 3 million on a maximal amount. And so as a result, what's going to happen is in 2 years, Trump is going to be a lame duck. And I almost guarantee you deportations are going to decrease because he's not going to have as much sway over Congress as he currently does. And then 2 years after that, we're back to the status quo. So you just ripped apart, 3 million, probably 70% of whom, 80% of whom are normies without a criminal record. You just sent them to another country and then we're going back to the status quo. So I hope it makes you feel good. I hope you feel good at night. I hope it warms your heart to just know that Mexicans are getting sent back to Mexico and El Salvadorans are getting sent back to El Salvador and Guatemalans are getting sent back to Guatemala. And then I hope in 2 years you soundly get your dick kicked in at the ballot box. Although, aren't you European too? Because of the left in the UK, we can't even deport rapists and murderers. Yeah, well, in the UK, you guys are more fucked than we are, right? And then you just answered my question whether or not you're European. You're European. Yeah, you should kill those people. If somebody is a convicted rapist, you should kill them. That's what you should do with them. The Crawling Chaos is Bo the liar or just effing R slurred. Well, I'm not going to lie. That's frustrating to me. Whatever says, and the immigrants did care at all for native population. Some ever say serves you right for the British Empire. Sure, and fuck those people. But I'm not British. I'm American. Kingslayer says, si se puede because the mom committed the detainable offense. It's her fault she detained, so any trauma that happens to the children is on the mother. Kingslayer, I think you are mistaking legalism for justice. I don't think there's any justice in these actions. Sacred Snow says, what made you think of tired of seeing tears for gangbangers? Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Connor, I wasn't lying. Well, neither was I. And I read the article, and you were wrong. He didn't win in court. A lower court ordered him to return control of the National Guard back to the state government. A higher court says that you can't compel them to do that until the case is reviewed. That's what happened. Trump hasn't won. Chris K says, Connor, I'm tired of both sides pointing and saying the system is wrong, so it's okay to circumvent it. That is not the way. It is the path to total collapse. Well, we agree on that. Anyways, Connor won on appeal. Where? Show me. Show me. Trump won National Guard case. That's what I Googled. Trump allowed to keep guard delayed to Los Angeles. That was the article that we read where they said that a higher court said he could keep control until it was pending review of the higher court. That did not say that he won the case. If this is going to be temporary, then I'm not conceding the ground to you. President Donald Trump has celebrated a big win after a federal appeals court ruled that he can maintain control over thousands of members of the California's National Guard while it's still pending review, brother. It's a temporary lifting of a lower court's ruling. This was written on July 20th, 2025 at 2:12 a.m. This is 10 hours ago. So again, you're reading the highlights. You're reading the headlines. You're not reading the articles. That's not my fault. That's your fault. So don't tell me that you're right when you're fucking wrong. I literally Googled it twice just to make sure that I wasn't wrong. Bo, you're wrong. It's pending review. Lower court ruled it unconstitutional and illegal. Higher court said, Trump, you can maintain control until we have a chance to review. That's all that's happened. So you saying Trump won is you reading the headline, not reading the article. Win an appeal equals win case, Gigabrain? No, it doesn't. It's still being reviewed. Literally, AJW is saying it's still reviewed. Fucking the article says that it's still being reviewed. You guys are declaring victory when you've had a stay of a legal order. You don't know the difference. That's not my fault. It's not my fault. They didn't win in appeals. They got a temporary stay of a lower court's order. You guys should probably know the difference before you comment on politics. As a matter of fact, Cricon says win an appeal equals win case, Gigabrain. If that's reference to somebody else, you do you. If that's reference to me, you should go find some Hot Wheels and you should fucking play with them because that's more your speed. All right. No, I just read the article. It's 10 hours old.
Are you taking him?
I'm actually going to use the restroom. Enjoy the chair react. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Hello?
Since you have no authority to arrest U.S. citizens.
Where are you taking the controller?
And with what authority?
Why are you arresting the city controller and where are you taking him?
Just back up.
No!
Number one's gonna go with him, all right? Hang on, please, number one. Hold on. Brett, this is number one right here, all right? Thank you.
Shame on you.
So the response to this from some on the left of center politically has been to decry it as an act of fascism. We have TikTok influencer Harry Sisson writing that in Trump's America, elected officials who he disagrees with get manhandled and arrested. This is as dictatorial as it gets. Zohran Mamdani, who we'll come to later, he wrote that New York City Comptroller Brad Lander was just arrested by Trump's ICE agents because he asked to see a judicial warrant. This is fascism. Stephen, I'm not so sure it is. And I've been critical of the way the Trump administration has handled some of these situations. I thought the law enforcement officers went overboard on Senator Padilla. But in this video, you see this comptroller literally physically link arms with an illegal immigrant who ICE is trying to arrest and refuse to let him go. That just seems like, to me, clear obstruction of justice. So is arresting him for it fascism?
In my opinion, I think that we don't have clear leaders right now for our kind of like activist movements. And so we don't have a clear message. And so nobody really knows exactly what's going on. I think that the argument over what's going on with ICE gets hijacked, I think, unfortunately, by people masquerading as moderates or masquerading as having reasonable opinions on both sides of this. I think on the right, you get a lot of people who are in favor of ICE because it's the federal law, blah, blah, but they really just want to deport basically everybody they can. And then on the left, you've got people who are saying that this is an overreach of presidential power, but really they just don't want to deport anybody, and they think that ICE is should be abolished. In my opinion, I think that if you want to link arms with some guy who you think is getting deported unfairly, not illegally, but unfairly, you just don't think it should be happening, I think you have the right to do that. I think it could be a beautiful form of civil disobedience, but part of civil disobedience is getting arrested. When you get arrested for obstructing a federal law enforcement officer for carrying out a job that he has the right to do, that's not fascism. That's just due process. I mean, you have, that's what'll happen. Now, again, if he wants to defend the guy, he doesn't think he should be deported, or he thinks the way.
Guys, I have Googled it again just to make sure that I'm not spouting bullshit on my own stream. Trump can keep National Guard in Los Angeles for now. This was published 6 minutes ago. So let's read it, though, because this could be contradictory. So I don't want to just skip it. President Donald Trump can keep the California National Guard in Los Angeles for now, a federal appeals court ruled on Thursday evening, delivering a win for the president as he aims to use the military to police protests against his deportation efforts. The unanimous decision from the 3-judge panel on the U.S. Court of Appeals of the Ninth Circuit, 2 of whom were appointed by Trump in his first term, and the 3rd appointed by President Joe Biden, said that Trump appears to have lawfully deployed the National Guard in the city, even though he did not consult the California Governor Newsom. I want to know what they're saying in order to support the statement. I'm not going to cope and pretend that I didn't just read this, okay? I just read this. They're saying that it's lawful. So hopefully they explain how it was lawful. The narrow order was issued on an emergency basis so that the federal government could quickly know whether it was allowed to keep the National Guard in place while litigation of the matter continues. A hearing Friday afternoon in a lower court will examine the broader question of when and how a president is allowed to deploy a state's National Guard. On social media, Trump hailed the appeals court's decision as a big win and suggested that it would open the door for similar deployments across the United States if he determines that local law enforcement is unable for whatever reason to get the job done. The San Francisco-based appeals court overturned a lower court order, said Trump had probably overstepped with... What? Okay. The San Francisco-based appeals court overturned a lower court order that said Trump had overstepped the deployment and should return control of the Guard to California Gavin Newsom. The Trump admin quickly appealed the decision, saying that the protesters prevented federal law enforcement from carrying out their duties related to deportations, and it was within his executive authority to call in the National Guard. The appeals panel disagreed with the federal government's stance that Trump's authority to deploy the National Guard could not be scrutinized by the courts, but the judges also rejected California's legal argument that a federal statute clearly requires a governor to be consulted before the deployment, rather than just having the president route the deployment command through the governor. In the end, the court ruled that the president showed that he had at least some reason to believe that protesters interfered with federal law enforcement's ability to carry out their deportation-related duties and that deploying the National Guard was necessary. Okay. The opinion cited evidence from both sides that protesters in LA threw objects at immigration. Okay, cool. Affording appropriate deference to the president's determination, we conclude that he likely acted within his authority in federalizing the National Guard, the opinion states. The appeals judges said that once the case is fully litigated, Trump is likely to win the argument over what a president must do to deploy a state's National Guard, which is why they're allowing the National Guard to remain in place for now. Okay. Trump had called up to 4,100 National Guard members and Marines in response to protests that swelled in parts of LA over the president's immigration deportation policies. In filings, California officials conceded that the protests had on occasion turned violent, but said thousands of state and local law enforcement officials were more than capable of responding to any disturbances. The state said no other president had ever deployed the state's National Guard over the governor's objections. The filing sought to restrict that the National Guard Marines could do in LA and argued that the troops should only be allowed to protect federal facilities and personnel. Demonstrations already have dwindled in LA, with law enforcement outnumbering protesters on some days, but the question in front of the court, which could reach the Supreme Court, could determine how and whether Trump wields state National Guards if demonstrations against his administration continue. Okay, listen, I'm going to give you a good faith summary as maximally as possible, even if it hurts my little fifis, okay? My understanding is that the lower court said, no, you can't federalize without, declaring the Insurrection Act, blah, blah, blah. The appeals court said that Trump could federalize the National Guard because federal buildings and federal buildings and federal law enforcement were under attack. Now, what I don't see here, which I think is a nuance of the line of argumentation that's going to have to go through litigation, is the fact that I don't think Trump might have the authority to get 4,100 National Guard members and Marines to respond to protecting federal buildings. I very much doubt that even the appeals court will give him the authority to police the streets of California with the National Guard and the Marines without declaring an insurrection. So that's a nuance that I haven't seen explored in any of the conversations. I'll concede that it's more complex than I originally gave it credit for.
Way ICE conduct themselves as bad and this is his way of protesting, then that's fine. But I mean, like, you're going to get arrested for it, of course. Yeah.
And I approach this as somebody who doesn't support mass deportation. I have a very different stance on immigration than Donald Trump, but just to me, it's laughable, this idea. And some of the other situations are murkier with the people visiting ICE detention centers, with even Senator Padilla. It's messier. But the idea that I could go up to police, because ICE is law enforcement. Whether you hate ICE, whether you want to abolish it, it's federal law enforcement. That I could go up to police arresting someone, link arms with that person, and refuse to let go of them and say, I want to see the evidence, I want to see a warrant, blah, blah, blah. You don't have the right to any of that. First of all, ICE can arrest people without a judicial warrant in some contexts, and often with just an administrative warrant. But regardless, it's like, that's not behavior you would get away with ever in any other context. And there's not, some Democratic officials seem to think there's like a special protection that comes from being a politician. That means that if you break the law, you're supposed to get away with it, and punishing you for it is fascism. But yeah. I'm not really buying that, Sean. And I think they're discrediting the legitimate grievances they may have in some other cases by crying fascism in instances like this that are just clearly not that, Sean.
This all needs to be understood in the context of the New York City mayoral election. Brad Lander has fallen behind Cuomo. He's fallen behind Mamdani. He needs a big stunt. And reportedly, he was hanging around that facility waiting for his moment for a very long time. As for the asking for a judicial warrant, deportation is typically an administrative procedure. It's not a criminal procedure. So oftentimes ICE uses administrative warrants. It's all like a stunt for the cameras. And of course, all the Democratic faithfuls, except for Andrew Cuomo, who I guess was taking a nap, so he decided to tweet something out. They did their press conferences about this. And of course, he's not charged, which then makes the Trump administration either look like they're backing down or that they just, heavy-handedly detained him for no reason. So it's a mess, but it's completely a political stunt. The guy is able to be deported. Immigration law is the purview of the federal government. You can be mad about that. You can say that you're going to have, when you're mayor, stronger sanctuary city protections, but you can't walk up to law enforcement, again, in almost any context, and try to shove them or grab the suspect. And if a normal person did that, you would be charged with resisting arrest, obstruction, something of the sort.
Charged? Whose decision was that, Sean?
When in doubt, resisting without.
On.
I'm guessing it's on the federal government if they were trying to pursue federal charges. Presumably, you could, in theory, refer him to the local government for charges, but that's never going to happen. And to your point about politicians thinking they have special protections, in some contexts they do. Politicians, if they're traveling to and from their district, they actually can't be detained by law enforcement, because it's considered the executive restricting their movement between their constituents and between Congress. So they do have some special protections, but this is beyond that, in my opinion. And I don't think a local comptroller has any business here, but a mayoral candidate definitely does.
So
also, just as a quick thing on the charging things, I wish more people would just be aware of stuff like this. Just because you get arrested or detained for a crime, to charge somebody and to prosecute somebody, our courthouses only have so much space. And if you're a DA, you're a prosecutor, you're looking at your whole log of stuff and all the cases that are brought before you. And it's okay, well, there's a guy who got arrested for obstructing a thing. Well, what's his record? Nothing. It was a politician. It's are you really going to have hearings and evidentiary study and all this? It's so
Trump
much trials.
DOJ, I would think they would.
even for the Trump DOJ, it's not the Trump DOJ though. It's going to have to be federal courthouses, and it's going to have to be. It's just so much. It's so much work. Like I understand. Like listen, I hate Trump more than literally anybody here. Okay, your hatred for Trump doesn't come close to my hatred for Trump. But like it's just a waste of time. I think. Yeah.
I'll also say, like, you could arrest or detain now and charge later. As soon as you file charges, the clock starts on all these like different administrative timelines. Like you have to have the hearing within this amount of time. So theoretically, they could charge later, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't
maybe not. But I do worry that, and I think this is just true objectively at this point. The Democrats are doing the boy who cried wolf thing, right? Because Trump has taken actions I genuinely view as authoritarian, I view as obviously illegal, that I view as violating due process. And without even getting into any of those separate debates, it's like if you call everything fascism, if you cry Hitler every single day, those messages just lose meaning. Like normal people are.
Well, that's where I think we're at, by the way. I feel like Democrats have cried fascism for so long over the past 10 years. Now that we actually have like really fucked up shit happening every single day, it just doesn't have the same effect that it used to. I'm checking with chat though, because I want to. Dylan Thomas says, I thought they already made the bad ruling. Apparently not, although there is a nuance to it, which is effectively that the appellate court believes that on the merits, the Trump admin will succeed in court. But the line of argumentation is that Trump has the authority to federalize the National Guard in order to protect federal law enforcement operations and to protect federal buildings. So he'll win, they think he'll win protecting federal buildings and federal law enforcement, but he probably won't win federalizing the National Guard or the military and then deploying them to stamp out, state level riots. Christian Blair says, we already know Trump is happy to lie about the national emergencies to circumvent Congress in reference to the tariffs. Yup. Fashion 40 says, Destiny Kid's giving you the answer right now, I guess. C-Dub says, Chris K, then we might be in a collapse. I'm going to stake the systems generally have to keep up. Interesting. Whatever says, Connor, do you think everyone on what you call the dissident right are just all wrong? No, they're right about plenty of things. Descriptively, when it comes to dissident right, I think they're correct that mass immigration is occurring. I think they're correct that liberalism is being tested left, right, and center, and that a bunch of leftist freaks have co-opted center-left parties in order to become more palatable in modern politics. I think that the Gramscian march through the institutions is descriptively correct. I'm trying to think of what else. I think that like liberals oftentimes sweep for leftists, and then as a result, they engage. They basically are handing the knife to the enemies that will eventually cut their own throat. Yeah, there's plenty of shit that I descriptively agree with the dissident right wing on, but I think the dissident right wing is also just like a bunch of freaks who think that once you deport the Jews and the blacks and the browns, then all of a sudden all our problems are going to disappear because white people, famous for never having wars amongst each other, are just all going to get along because we're going to have some fraternity based on, what did Sargon say? Like, he's like, based on like goodwill and friendship. He thinks that we're going to eliminate the blacks and the browns and the Jews, and then we're just going to have a friendly society. I think that's fucking crazy and ahistorical. But 123 says, do you think the U.S. grant using the army against the KKK in the South was against states' rights? Yeah, probably. That U.S. grant using the army against the KKK in the South? Yeah. Like they had to do some shit with Posse Comitatus in order to do it. I think they had to probably declare the Insurrection Act in order to do that. Bo Dickerson says, emergency humanitarian waiver to foreign assistance pause January 28th, 2025. Connor, total invasion in Arkansas, huh? What? You're going to have to be more specific, Bo. You're not being specific enough. Emergency humanitarian waiver to foreign assistance pause January 28th. Yeah. And guess what? They deemed PEPFAR not immediately life-saving, so it still remains discontinued. Stop walking over the power cords. My deaf dog, so when I yell at him, he doesn't even hear me. He just stumbled over all of my power cords. Fuck. Humanitarian waiver. So this should be easy. Did PEPFAR get a humanitarian waiver? Yes, PEPFAR, the presidency received a limited humanitarian waiver during the 90-day pause in foreign aid. This waiver allowed PEPFAR to continue certain life-saving HIV services. Specifically, the waiver permitted the continuing of HIV treatment and care, prevention of mother-to-child transmission, pre-exposure prophylaxis for pregnant and breastfeeding women, and HIV testing. Other activities, including broader HIV prevention efforts and programs for vulnerable children, were not included. Other activities, including broader HIV prevention efforts, condoms, and programs for vulnerable children, kids already infected with HIV who need retrovirals in order to make sure that they don't die from the common cold, were not included in the waiver. And now that PEPFAR, what has PEPFAR been, or funding been restored? Through a limited waiver? Nope. PEPFAR's one-year authorization expired on March 25th, 2025. A limited waiver was issued to restore some PEPFAR activities, which is what we just read. The waiver allows for the resumption of life-saving HIV care and treatment for services. Full reauthorization and long-term funding for PEPFAR are still being debated. So let's take a look if it's a part of the proposed budget. Is PEPFAR included in the big, beautiful bill? No, PEPFAR is not included in the big, beautiful bill. Explanation, PEPFAR is blah, 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 blah. Hold on. White House budget chief pressed on PEPFAR funds says Africa on Wednesday was pressed on proposed cuts to the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, purposed as part of a new rescissions request. Oh, it was a part of the rescissions, so I was right. During a budget hearing Wednesday, Vought defended proposed reductions as targeting like teaching young children how to make environmentally friendly reproductive health decisions, and efforts he claimed were aimed at strengthening the resilience of lesbian, gay, blah, 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 blah. We can find waste, fraud, and abuse there that the American people would not support, and it's one of the reasons why it's in the package. But it will not lead to life-saving treatment being denied, he said during the hearing. Congress under Biden admin appropriated approximately $7 billion for PEPFAR in 2024. The program is considered to be one of America's most consequential programs in Africa and is credited with saving 25 million lives and scaling back the AIDS pandemic. During the hearing, Representative blah, 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 in a follow-up question, pressed Vought again about his comments and potential cuts to prevention efforts. Aside from the crazy woke programs, which I agree should be stripped, Alfred said, is there any other prevention program, not treatment, but prevention program listed in the rescissions package, which is not a part of a woke nature? Vought said in response that the admin seeks to scale down the program as it pertains to the types of organizations that are providing the examples of waste, fraud, and abuse, but he also said the prevention itself is where an analytical look needs to be done. There's life-saving treatment after you already have HIV, but there are prevention programs that PEPFAR does, which are not of a woke nature, which can prevent someone from getting HIV, Alfred continued. Are those programs going to survive? It is something that our budget will be very trim on because we believe that many of these nonprofits are not geared towards the viewpoints of the admin, and we're $37 trillion in debt, Vought responded. So at some point, the continent of Africa needs to absorb more of the burden of providing the health care. The moment comes as the prospect of PEPFAR cuts as prompted concern for some congressional Republicans as part of a larger request sent by the Trump admin to cut more than $9 billion in congressionally approved funds for foreign aid and public broadcasting programs. So it looks like there's congressmen who are fighting about whether or not it'll be a part of the BBB. But Bo, what I'm telling you is based off of what we've read, the only thing that continued through March, by the way. All right, let's summarize it. Through March, PEPFAR was authorized. It was a part of the cuts of the Trump 90-day pause. However, the Trump admin allowed for the treatment of mothers who might pass AIDS to their children to continue because that was viewed as life-saving, immediately life-saving treatment. However, they did not continue the retroviral care for at-risk youth. So children who already have HIV did not have access to the drugs that would prevent them from catching the common cold and then dying. This program has been stopped since March. It is now June. So we have 90 days without PEPFAR being funded. In Congress, because they're debating the big, beautiful bill, are fighting about whether or not certain parts of the program of AIDS prevention are woke because it's telling gay people to use condoms. So right now, everything that I said about it being on the chopping block during January through March was true because they cut off everything except for prevention for infants. It has been defunct since March, and the Trump admin is trying to cut down a substantive amount of the program. So while you can add in the nuance that maybe the Trump admin maybe is interested in continuing the care for AIDS-infected mothers, right now, I think the global estimate as a result of PEPFAR not being funded right now is that 1,500 children per day are being born with AIDS because we're not doing this program right now. So, as always, the world is more nuanced than the headlines.
Are like rolling their eyes. They're saying fascism again. I mean, don't you think Democrats have a problem with that, Destiny?
No, what Democrats have a problem with is somehow we allow all of our political messaging to be held hostage by people who hate Democrats. I don't know how this happened or why this happened.
Leftists?
But
are you talking about leftists or right-wing people?
Yes. They, for some reason, they dictate like the Democratic media diet, and I don't know why or how this has. Well, there are a couple of guesses, I guess, age, demographics, or whatever. But yeah, I fully agree that there are things where, and I have to run my audience this one. Is like, hey, listen, like criminals being arrested is a good thing. Okay, really bad people being deported is a good thing. ICE and the border.
ACAB Badasoy, go ahead and listen because I think Steven's about to answer your question.
These are good things. All of us should want these things. The way that Trump is doing a lot of it is bad. But when you start coming out here, or when you allow your political message to be hijacked by people who think that all deportations are wrong or that all law enforcement is bad, like there is a huge issue when I saw, like earlier, we were having a conversation with California, and I don't like the fact that the National Guard was deployed to handle what I felt was easily handleable by local police. But then you get other huge leftist content creators who are saying that the feds and the LAPD are all one and the same. And it's like, okay, well, if you believe that, you've like totally missed, in my opinion, any of the important messaging on the deployment of the National Guard because you just hate all law enforcement. And I do think that's a huge issue, and it muddies the message in a very bad, politically ineffective way.
They missed the point of the raids too, because part of the reason why they're trying to do the raids in businesses is because, like Home Depot and all these different locations, is because the LAPD can't coordinate with them, so they can't pick up the criminals. So like that's quite literally the stated goal of Tom Homan, to raid these different locations to try to press them to turn over these criminals. So
but also
there's
the Trump
a huge
administration
distinction.
Wants to deport more than just criminal aliens. They want to deport them all. They want to deport mass deportation.
Stephen Miller wants to get the numbers up to higher than Biden's numbers, which is funny because Biden relied on those like turnaways at the border, whatever they call it, expedited removal.
Right. So it's a different situation. That's why Obama's deportation numbers were so high. It's because they deported a lot of people right after they crossed the border, which you can just send them right back. Whereas it's obviously much harder to do when you're arresting people in the interior of the United States and then deporting them. But so Stephen mentioned hating the police. I don't know about hating the police, but defunding the police is something that one of the two major mayoral candidates, Zohran Mamdani,
Sultan. Every time I'm going full screen and I'm going to address chat because I think you guys are going to be more entertaining than this line of questioning, and I want to catch up a little bit with chat. But every time you see Zohran, there's a movie called Dude, Where's My Car? Where a stoner loses his car and has to spend the entire movie, I think it's starring Ashton Kutcher, running around town looking for his car, and he goes on a series of hijinks from when he got stoned the day before. And he effectively has amnesia, so he has to rediscover everything. And one of the things that happened was that they got linked up with a cult that worships an alien deity named Zoltan. And so whenever they say Zoltan's name, they go, Zoltan! And they hit the Z super hard like this. And so every time that somebody says Zoran, I hit him with the Z. I hit him with the Z. So if you see my Twitter, Counterconor, Counterconor, that's what I'm doing. But I want to read some of your chats because I have a feeling that you guys fought me in chat, but I'm too slow in order to read all of it. ACAP Badasui says, think about it rationally, Connor. If the state itself is allowing dangerous people to enter, is that knowingly, it's an invasion. ACAP Badasui, victory has defeated you, okay? An invasion is men with fucking guns and uniforms storming into your fucking country in order to take territory and kill your people. An invasion is what Russia is doing to Ukraine. An invasion is what Hitler did to all of Europe. An invasion is what Japan did to the East, right? The fact that you think an invasion is thousands of Mexicans, some of whom are criminals, coming across the fucking border is your privilege. The fact that you think a military invasion is comparable to Juan and Juanita and Juan Seco and Juan Jeco coming across the border is fucking insane. Okay? ACAB, you've been a part of this community for a very long time, and I love you a lot. And maybe I'm just being fucking grumpy today, but the fact that you said that without thinking about comparing a military invasion to an immigration wave, I think is fucking crazy pants and indicative of how privileged Americans are as a country. Kingslayer Damocles says, "Sí, se puede." Let's say someone is moving weight and the one time they aren't armed is when picking up their kids. If the cops move in and arrest the person, whose fault is that arrest? I don't give a shit. Arrest people who are moving weight. I don't give a fuck. You think I give a fuck about drug traffickers? If they said, hey, this chick is like a part of the Argentinian mob, do you think that I would have even shown you that clip? Crawling Chaos says, the KKK is a terror org. Military certainly can fuck up terrorists. Sure. ACAP Badasui says, Newsom was shielding people who have no legal right to be in the country. Okay. Crawling Chaos says, then again, why spend time on some dildos defending Orange Adolf? He has broken so many laws, it would be hilarious if it wasn't so fucking devastating. Because we're trying to convince the dildos that we are correct. And so sometimes that involves yelling. Sometimes that involves being nice. R. Hickernell says, more recent right-wing violence were the Buffalo supermarket shooter. I remember that video. And the Walmart mass shooters both cited white supremacy. Interesting. Kingslayer keeps saying si se puede for some reason. You didn't answer the question, who is wrong in my hypothetical, the criminal or the law enforcement? Law enforcement isn't wrong for arresting somebody moving weight. Nobody's wrong there. I just don't think that crossing the border and having a pending asylum case is the same as moving and trafficking drugs. I don't think you do either. The Crawling Chaos is free speech curbed. What a fucking joke. You know what ultimate freedom is? Anarchy. Yeah, welcome to Mad Max. Enjoy. No, I'm good. Si se puede says, Kingslayer Damocles, I mean, I said, sure, then go ahead. A non-dumb person would interpret that as me agreeing that arresting her was probably okay. Yep, there we go. Oh, you were saying somebody else's name. You were saying Si se puede's name. I thought you were just being racist. That's funny. Excuse me. I'm dying. Sapien Green says, you can say the N-word on Twitter. I thought American linguistic hysteria meant it would result in severe social consequences outside of even Twitter, even if Twitter didn't block you. No, I think you can say it, especially with an A. Pachyderma says, Walmart and Amazon both wanted to post the amount of the tariffs were costing customers and relented after Trump threatened them with consequences. Free speech is mostly dead in America. Not really. It'll come back when Trump's gone. Bud123 said, the BLM riots caused over $1 billion in damage and many mayors, governors told their police to stand down because it is Trump stopping the riots. Okay. BLM was cringe. Kingslayer says, si se puede question. Oh, you guys are still talking to each other. Philip says, 114 people watching and 62 like. Up those numbers, chat. True. Like the stream. We bounced between 100 and 110, probably because we were covering Stephen Bennell II. You guys are still talking to each other. Sapien Green, testing 1, 2, 3. Thank you for the donation, King. Very much appreciated. Scrolling. Just looking for people who are talking to me. Shadow 2 Bravo says AJW is great. Why did I figure that you would like him? AK Badasui says, unfortunately, I think you have to allow nationwide injections to exist because the U.S. Supreme Court can choose not to bear a federal case, and we do have other federal courts. That's probably true. All right, whatever says, not being old Twitter that suppressed conservative voices. All right, one more. Fashion 40 says, AJW is very smug. I really don't believe he had any concrete beliefs. He's just happy to win debates. Nah, he's a conservatarian, 100%. 100%. He's not like a total anti-status freak, but he leans libertarian, and he does make a lot of like criminal arguments for race realism, even though I don't know if he's actually a race realist. Anyways, back to the content.
Has basically been all in on. This is the post from him from just a few years ago. We believe in socialist
Zoran
feminism. Zoran for State Assembly. Defunding the police is a feminist issue. Women, especially trans women, are disproportionately impacted by police violence and the violence of incarceration. We need to divest from these systems and invest in services that lift us all up. June 8th, 2020. I mean, on one hand, you have this guy who is to the left of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's like a hardcore DSA guy, wants to globalize the Intifada, all sorts of stuff. And on the other hand, you have Andrew Cuomo, the disgraced ex-governor who covered up the nursing home scandal and so much more. I mean, Destiny, if these are the two candidates, and one of them is likely going to be the next mayor of New York City and a major face of the Democratic Party, I mean, that the absolute state of the Democratic Party isn't looking so good.
Well, the relative state is still compared to the Republican side, which I think looks infinitely better. I'll be honest, I don't have strong opinions on the New York mayoral race because I don't live in New York. The Zohar guy seems very memeable and very epic in that kind of way to me. As far as Cuomo and the old person home scandal, I think it's very funny that we go back and forth on whether or not COVID was a big hoax that meant nothing versus it was the most deadly disease of all time, and shipping 2 old people into an old homes facility condemned thousands to death. I just don't have a strong opinion on the New York mayoral race, other than that the Zohar dude seems absolutely insane, and Cuomo just kind of seems more like a status quo-ish politician.
Well, Cuomo also resigned for
Status Cuomo.
Yeah,
there we go.
Ooh, he was proud of himself for that one. Look at his face.
So
politician.
Cuomo also resigned for
Status Cuomo.
Yeah,
there we go.
Cuomo,
Hey, that was good. He's really proud of himself for that one, and I'm proud of him too.
So I actually, I don't think COVID is a hoax. Your point's taken about some MAGA types. That was never me. So I'm very horrified by what he did to nursing homes. But then I'm actually much more horrified by the cover-up, because maybe it was an honest mistake in the moment that he did this nursing home policy, but then his government tried to cover it up. And I think that's a massive scandal. But regardless, he was actually, the reason he resigned wasn't because of that. It was because of a massive sexual harassment allegations that he resigned.
Yeah, wasn't Andrew Cuomo like, hey, I'm Italian? Like, wasn't that what came out of it?
And doesn't it undercut what I think is a strong line of criticism for Democrats against Trump, that he is a terrible person who's harassed all these women, who was found civilly liable for abusing E. Jean Carroll, like this laundry list of his personal foibles. But then if they're going to look past it and just like make Andrew Cuomo the mayor, I mean,
I would have to dig.
Wait, isn't turnabout fair play? Again, like, I'm not saying that like I want Andrew Cuomo, the Italian Pepe Le Pew rapist, to be the mayor of New York, although I do think New York's kind of a hellhole almost no matter what you do. But at the same time, like, why would Republicans care? If they know that Donald Trump allegedly had sex with a 12-year-old prostitute in the 1980s, if they know that he was boys with Jeffrey Epstein in the 80s and the 90s, if they know that he allegedly fingered E. Jean Carroll against her will, if they know that he allegedly had sex with a pornographic actress while his wife was pregnant, if they know that he was caught on tape saying that when you're rich and powerful, women will let you do whatever you want. You can grab them by the vagina. They'll let you do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If none of that sunk Trump, and these are allegedly social conservatives who are looking past what Trump did, why would you care about an Italian guy being Italian? Now, maybe that's a very blasé, way to describe what Andrew Cuomo did, but I'm just saying, like, why would Republicans care? Democrats might care. Why would Republicans care?
I feel like I looked at the Cuomo stuff coming out of the time and I was like, I don't know. Maybe I'd have to go back through those and see if the sexual harassment stuff was as bad as I guess some people are claiming it was. It seemed like a whatever to me. Not good, but not like
the governorship over it.
He was what?
He resigned the governorship because of it. So
yeah, but as a Democrat, right? I mean, Al Franken quit the Senate over the pictures from 20 years earlier. Like, that doesn't mean anything. Yeah, I would have to be honest, I would have to dig into it more to know if I would have like a much stronger opinion over this. But one thing I will say is you have to be really careful politically when we're talking about securing political power. You have to be careful not to play a game by yourself. And if some people have decided in our political system that some things don't matter, and you decide that it does matter, and you're only handicapping yourself as a result of that, there's no virtue to be gained there. And I think that's a lesson that needs.
Again, I disagree with Steven. I think it's virtuous to hold yourself to a higher standard, but you can also expect to lose with your virtue. So there is virtue in having standards. Just be prepared to lose.
Be learned. I say this a lot to my fellow Dems who always want to obsess over every time they talk about every single problem. It's just billionaire, 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 and it's like Elon Musk and Trump have basically been elected to run the country for however long. Clearly, Americans don't give a about this issue. Move on and talk about something else. It can't just be the hyperfixation, right? When it comes to every sexual harassment allegation or lawsuit or whatever else is going on with these people, like Trump was found civilly liable for basically raping the woman with his fingers. Like what? This is why are we going to die on this hill
for the rape part, but for abusing her sexually.
Okay, I hope he doesn't sue me next. I thought he was raping her with his fingers, but
it's digital penetration is what he was accused of and found civilly liable for.
I'm just saying that, like, if Cuomo really did some crazy bad things there, apparently the voters don't care.
I do live in New York City, so I will say.
Well, Fashion 40 says AJW is very smug. I really don't believe he has any concrete beliefs. He's just happy to win debates. Nope, I think he's a conservatarian. I've talked with him enough that I think he is a legitimate conservatarian. Kingslayer Damocles says, I'm talking you down a logic tree. I'm sorry you were so shallow you can't follow logic. Are you guys still shit-talking each other, or are you shit-talking me? Because obviously I've been very grumpy today. ACAP Batasui says, you can't civilly disobey and then resist arrest. It doesn't work that way. Agreed. ICE is federal law enforcement. Agreed. Bud123 says, what was the arrest for? Resisting without violence. Dev Lily says, 76. Yeah, unless you're some covert operator or an undercover mission, your face should be shown and badge number available. Agreed. Largely. I think that when you're doing like SWAT raids and stuff, because it's so sensitive and it's like rifles and shit, you could probably get away with doing a balaclava. But I do think that effectively, if you're covering up your cops' faces, unless you live in a failed narco state, there's something going wrong. Cise Puede says, I'm sure you've said something previously, but as a former Leo, do you find it as BS as I do that these agents are sometimes masked and or plain clothed? Yeah, I think every operation should largely be done plain clothes, except for if you're like an undercover agent or if you're a SWAT officer engaged in SWAT activity. All patrol operations and routine arrest operations should be done with your face exposed and your badge number available. ACAP Batasui says, apparently there's two different types of warrants, and I think ICE has been using an easier to obtain warrant, which might not be the right type. Now, let me actually tell you something else, though. Let me tell you something else. Because cops do have a good reason to be afraid of people doxing and harassing them, okay? They do have a good reason. I got told 2 or 3 times by drug lieutenants that they would kill me and kill my entire family. And I have to tell you, I did fantasize about grabbing a couple of cinder blocks and going into the Everglades in order to remedy that situation. Now, thank God, I live in a time and a place where murdering cops and their families is not normal or routine. But I would say if that started to become a thing, I would actually be perfectly okay with doxing laws for law enforcement, where their badge number and name and admin is known to the public, but their address when it comes to white pages, yellow pages, internet search forums is listed as the police department headquarters. Because if you want to confront somebody, you should be able to do so through a legal manner, but I don't think you should be able to do vigilante violence against law enforcement. ACAP Badasuri says, apparently, I think I might have read that. There's 2 different types of warrants, and I think ICE has been using an easier to obtain warrant. Yeah, they were saying that it was an admin warrant instead of a judicial warrant. That was part of the argumentation. Bo Dickerson says, Connor, you're right. Sorry for the liar accusation. Okay, buddy. Listen, Bo, I'm sorry that I got worked up. I'm sorry that I'm being particularly rude today. I'm sorry that I'm telling MAGA to go fuck itself. I'm sorry for being spicy today. My genuine apologies. Like normally, Bo, Kingslayer, whatever, Justin, there's a few other Groypers or whatever, Razzle Cherry, we can normally have a pretty chill conversation. But I think today in particular, I am just overwhelmed by how much fucked up shit the Trump admin has done. And not only has much of it's done, but how much it's betrayed its own principles. And I'm just waiting for MAGA and the right wing to finally be like, you know what, Connor? Trump is pretty fucked up. Trump did fuck up a lot of shit, and he's fucking over things that I believe in. Therefore, he's probably the piece of shit that you say he is. I've been waiting for that day for a decade. It's happened with a couple of people, but it hasn't happened with a lot of people. And so, you know, I appreciate you guys being more conservative than me, more right-wing than me, more distant than me, and being willing to listen to what I have to say, even if we disagree. But I'm just waiting for you to, like, all the evidence that I'm presenting to you, I'm just waiting for you to break my way, and you just never do. So it gets frustrating. So I'm sorry if I'm being a fucking dick, but anyways. Cricon says, laugh my ass off. Only an ultra progressive hyper Marxist would defend keeping an illegal who is undeniably a violent gang member. But let's make sure Democrats apologize for the commies that don't vote Democrat anyways. Precisely. Sacred Snow says, Abrego Garcia, because he has been spammed in the news, instead of going on a rant about how it's due process, I wanted to make sure you weren't talking about something I missed because of the bubbles. Nope, they're talking about Abrego Garcia. Like 80% they're talking about Abrego Garcia. True Zealot, hello, good to see you, friend. No one cares about people wanting to deport criminals. Pretty sure the past few months discourse between right and left has been a good chunk about that. No, True Zealot, do not fall for the red herring, okay? The reason why that's a discussion isn't because all of the left disagrees with deporting or incarcerating criminals. It's because they want due process. If somebody is accused of a crime, they should be able to show up in front of a judge and have the evidence against them judged. That was the entire fight about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, is that the Trump admin just said, oh, he's an MS-13 gang member, trust us. And the media was like, no, we don't trust you, especially when you're sending a guy to Sakat, which is effectively like a El Salvadoran jail without any due process. We don't trust you. So show us the evidence. And after like a month of fighting for the evidence, they finally showed like, oh, you know, he was caught in a car despite not having a criminal record. He was caught in a car with a bunch of other Central Americans. He was caught in a Home Depot with $1,200 cash on his person and some gang red flags, like some things that means he could be a part of a gang, but isn't fully he's a part of a gang. And maybe he beat his wife up in 2021. And you know what? For me, that was enough to say maybe Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a bad hombre and maybe he deserves to get deported. Probably not to Sakat, but he probably deserves to get deported. And so that was enough. But a judge should have reviewed that, removed the stay order, and approved his deportation. And that's what Democrats were fighting about. ACAB Badasoy says, U.S. Supreme Court, Connor. I have no idea what that's in reference to, ACAB Badasoy. Try writing in full sentences.
Say the reason Cuomo resigned is because Letitia James assembled a report of a bunch of different allegations against Andrew Cuomo, and I think there's like 15 women, and when you examine like what he's being accused of, it ranges from some serious stuff, which is the overwhelming minority of the women there, to Andrew Cuomo was looking at me and I could tell he was undressing me with his eyes. So it's like some of these allegations are absurd in the first place, and of course Letitia James wanted to run for governor, so like
Democrats are the Believe Women party, so don't they have to uphold that standard then? I mean,
but look, Cuomo's a name. He's running on name brand recognition, but Mamdani is the worst. And what you have to do as a New Yorker, if you're in the Democratic primary,
sorry, real quick, chat's being interesting still. This is happening to saying in the lower court ruling, it lays out how insane it is and went through every possible justification. Yeah, and this is happening. This is what I was trying to say as a steel man, because I really do. When I'm getting vociferous criticism and I'm pissing off people who are not a part of my political tribe, that's okay. Like, I understand that I'm going to make people frustrated. But what I try to do is not be unfair, right? So if a lower court says federalizing the National Guard doesn't make sense for X, Y, Z, A, B, C reason, and then what is it? And then the higher court says, well, he can still federalize National Guard in order to protect federal assets. Then, that has to be fought out in court, right? Cise Puede says, Cricon catching strays from Connor, not reading the sarcasm. Sorry, guys, put a /S. I might have a little bit of autism. Cricon says, I was making fun of the idea that the appeal win would have won the case. I was making fun of them. I gotcha. All right. I love you, Cricon. My apologies. I'm sorry that I said that you should play with Hot Wheels. That's the nicest way for me to call people stupid. Yep. Yeah, I am very grumpy today. My apologies. My apologies. I'm sorry, Cricon. I'm sorry you caught a stray. My bad. It's going to happen sometimes.
Is you have to choose between the guy who signed bail reform, less is more, raise the age, and all these insane criminal justice reforms because he wanted to run for president and he didn't really believe in them, versus the guy who believes in all of that stuff plus 10x more things. And there's interviews of Mondani saying defund the police. He has like 70 tweets of him saying defund the police. He didn't even delete those tweets, and
But
he's denying
it
that
on stage, saying,
yeah,
will
he's
not defund
denying
the
it on
police.
stage. So like, this is where this guy's at. And by the way, if you look at his campaign, he now doesn't say the words defund the police, but he still talks about how, oh, I want to reallocate funding that's in the department and like get rid of overtime and not hire any new people and fund that and funnel that to social work and all these like after school programs like midnight basketball. Like he's still like a defund the police kind of guy. Like that's where he's at. He has insane housing policies where he wants to do the rent freeze, which is just absurd. Like we already have enough restrictions on the rental market in New York City, and it's just like we're never gonna get past. Like he's losing in the polls, so like it's gonna be.
I'm a little surprised that you're not more exercised about Zoran, because I mean he literally just defended the statement "globalize the Intifada" in a podcast interview yesterday, and I feel like you've been critical of the far left, extreme Free Palestine types, and he seems very much in that mold.
What do you, or wait, so what are you asking me?
Like, why you're not more bothered that he could win and become a major figure in the Democratic Party, even though he's part of that camp?
Well, my understanding is he is not. It doesn't look like he can win at all right now, right? Could he actually win, or? Well,
a couple of weeks ago, the polling looked okay for him. He's definitely looking down now, but he's one of the only two major candidates left.
Yeah, I mean, like I hate this guy. I think he represents literally the worst of the left, like in every conceivable possible way. Like the dumbest and most brain dead economic policies, the dumbest and most brain dead foreign policies, the dumbest and most brain dead social policy. Like I hate everything about this guy.
I have to dunk on Live and Learn a little bit. And the reason why, even though I love those guys and I appreciate them bringing me on the show, they were bullying Hutch so bad for saying like moderate Dems never win. Moderate Dems never win. Democrats just need to, run on further lefty policy. All the people will follow. And then for the 50th time in Democratic history, there's a moderate Democrat in Cuomo, the Italian Pepe Le Pew, and there's Zoran, who is running on all this lefty bullshit that they probably approve of. He's probably too far left for them. And they're cheering on Zoran. And Zoran, as far as I can tell, no one expects him to win. They expect him to get stomped. So why are they bullying the moderates when the moderates are consistently correct? Right? True Zealot says, Connor, have you, if you were worried about schizo from THC because of demons flying out of your head, ever thought about, even as a FOBIT, you should go visit your local VA? I did. And I got a minimal rating.
My assumption, though, is that there wasn't a good chance of him winning, and that's why Rudy was.
It's enough to help pay a few bills. It's not enough for me to retire on my own. But, I appreciate Uncle Sam helping me out a little bit.
I thought people were having all these crazy ideas about how to game the ballots in order to do the ranked choice and to get people to vote in one way.
The ranked choice thing does interject a little bit of unpredictability to it, because it's fairly new to American electoral system, and people are still figuring out exactly how it works. Like you see the candidates saying, Zoran did some video with one of the other candidates, like rank him second, rank him. It's like,
yeah,
it's
you know
weird.
what? Let me say this, okay? First past the post. It is what it should be. Screw it. I've seen videos talking about issues with other voting systems, because really no voting system is perfect, and there are logical issues with all of them. But I will say, listening to Canadians talk about their ranked choice thing, and then listening to the New York thing, there's this concept. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase strategic voting. The way that people will like vote in order to kind of like, well, I know this guy can't win, so I'm going to put him first. And there's screw this. This is stupid. I don't know. I feel like we're going to be in some scenario where some 27-year-old pirate, with a peg leg and an eye patch is going to get elected somewhere because everybody's minding themselves over how to game their ballot. And it just seems ridiculous to me.
I like ranked choice voting. I don't agree with Steven at all. There are candidates that I would 100% vote for, particularly if it was ranked choice. And I think ranked choice can show you popular support for third parties that might actually win electoral favor, but because we're stuck in the binary system, we're not capable. I probably, in a ranked choice voting system, I would have voted Libertarian a healthy chunk of times. Believe it or not, despite Gary Johnson's foibles, I felt like Gary Johnson, he took the gas off halfway through his campaign. Early in the campaign, He was coherent. He was cogent. He was going on to big shows. He was talking a big game. He was going on mainstream news things. And then basically he had like the Aleppo, like what is Aleppo moment. And then he also had like another thing where he was kind of pot-headed and flat-footed. And I think after that, he just quit. He was just like, oh, well, I'm not going to win anyway, so I might as well just have fun. And then he just started having fun on the campaign trail. And it's like, listen, man, I like people having fun. But if you want me to take you seriously as a presidential candidate, then you need to take your campaign seriously, even if you have a snowball chance in hell of winning. And so in a ranked choice system where Gary Johnson or someone akin to him took politics seriously, I would vote libertarian. But he didn't take it seriously at all in the second half of his campaign. So that's not my fault. That's Gary Johnson's fault. Corey Peltzman says, I got Pisco to say that he trusts the IRGC more than Israel. That's one of the craziest fucking things. If that's true, where Pisco said that I trust information coming from the IRGC more than the IDF, he is just swimming in lefty brain soup. And I need to go like rescue Lib and Learn from getting co-opted by freak lefties.
Maybe I'm just too old now. Maybe 36 is too much for me. I can't handle new things in my brain, but it just seems stupid. I don't know.
So
That's how I feel about
Sean,
it.
I do find it funny that like they decided to institute this like truest form of democracy in an off-year election that takes place in June. Like, so it's like an election literally designed for unions and anybody with the political machine to turn out the vote, while everyday people aren't going to show up. Like, that's the whole reason why you have off-year elections for these local positions, so people don't pay attention to it. But like, the reason there was hype around him is because he did gain a lot of ground on Andrew Cuomo. That's just a
Gen X is our resident JD, and she did say something that the news article said, which is that Trump deploying the National Guard in order to quell civil unrest in the cities is not what they were authorized to do, even by the appellate court. They were authorized to protect federal buildings and federal law enforcement. And I'm reading in federal law enforcement, but specifically federal buildings, Gen X is saying. So since she has a JD and is capable of reading, I'm going to trust Gen X because that's similar to my interpretation. Bo says he'll take the W. All right. Corey Peltzman says, you have no heart if you're not a liberal at 25 and no brain if you're not a conservative at 35. Yeah, that's why I've been a centrist my entire life, because I have a heart and a brain.
Fact. But there was a poll that was put out that showed him in the lead last week. And that's the one poll that people have been pointing to in order to kind of turn the media coverage to just focus on his like inevitable rise. But the thing is, it's like his organization paid for that poll, and that poll doesn't factor in ranked choice voting, and that poll
ACAP Batasui says, if the governor is slowing down ICE and not protecting the state citizenry, it's a mini invasion. No, it's not, man. Literally, just go watch like a World War II documentary and come back to me.
Samples voters under 45, which they know is his strength. So it's like they're basically, you know, all these left wingers that will talk about manufacturing consent are like quite literally falling for that right now. Like it's insane.
Well, it's just so it does seem like it's going to be Cuomo. And I mean, I guess I'm just kind of nihilistic about the state of American politics at this point. But the idea that you could be the governor of a major state, handle COVID terribly, be responsible for the deaths of senior citizens in your state, then engage in a long cover-up, then resign in disgrace over sexual harassment allegations, and then run for another major office and win. I mean, I guess in the era of Trump, like,
I was going to say, if you handled COVID horribly, try to cover up a bunch of stuff related to that. Sexual assault allegation conviction, re-ran for office and won after leaving a disgrace. We've described Trump verbatim, but he was the president, so ironic.
A New York guy, too.
I did preface it with, this is...
Oh, AJW didn't even clutch his pearls. He said they're both New York guys, too. That's funny. AJW was funny in this, man. Like, we can hate on AJW, but this was a good one. He did good.
Well, I'm nihilistic about all of American politics.
He was nice and funny in this one.
The standards are on the floor, and I don't think they're going to be raised anytime soon.
Look, if you want me to make it worse, if Cuomo decided to run for governor again, then he would knock all these Democrats out of the primary for governor. Like his name means something. Mario Cuomo was the governor. I think he was elected governor in New York 3 times. He probably could have weathered that storm, but like, you know, he did have all those COVID scandals that people were talking about, and then this kind of came out of nowhere. But yeah, like
28 president.
yeah, I mean, he's going for it. My favorite thing though is that Ocasio-Cortez says that she was against the gerontocracy, and that's why we needed to back Mamdani, who's the youngest candidate. He's 33 years old. This woman endorsed the only candidate, in the race that was older than Joe Biden in 2020. Like the idea that she's against that on principle. Andrew Cuomo is 16 years younger than Bernie Sanders is right now.
Yeah, but Bernie Sanders is pretty sharp for being old. I know what AJW is saying, and I do think it's ironic. However, I think that you could make an argument that Bernie is fairly sharp for a super old guy. I disagree with him viciously, but he's still pretty sharp.
All right, guys. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. Really enjoyed the conversation. Everybody, I will link to their channels below. If you enjoyed the conversation, let us know what you think in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed, like, yada, yada, yada. With that, we'll talk again real soon.
Good job. Good job, Brad. You did a great job. Let me go ahead and summarize that, and then I'm going to engage with chat. So, in summary, I was actually ecstatic to see AJW and Steven having like a good conversation and a good debate. I also thought that Brad did a good job moderating. Almost as soon as I brought up my points, Steven almost immediately brought up similar points, which is good. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on some things, and we agree on a healthy chunk of things descriptively. I think that I did get pissed off and triggered by a healthy chunk of right-wing folk in my chat, and it's not because they're not entitled to their opinions. It's just like, I feel like they're coping past what the Trump admin has really done in the past, 4 or 5 months. And so it's frustrating for me. I'm sorry for yelling. I'm sorry for getting all spurgy and all that kind of stuff. But I actually legitimately did get angry. It's, it's frustrating to feel like a bunch of really bad, evil shit is happening and people don't recognize it or don't pay attention to it or they sweep past it. I don't like tricks for treats, but I do like showing off my muscles. So if I get a healthy donation, then sure.